motto?
That's our motto for today. On that note, we'll call this meeting of Responsibility Working Group to order. Welcome everybody in. It is nice to see so many faces in person. I mean, we were just talking, since Leslie was chair, we've been at least mostly virtual. And so we're glad to have everybody in the room. For the most part, Commissioner Lerner, Commissioner Miller, and Chairman Kessner on the line with us, along with members and Mr. Warren, who is just glutton for punishment, it would appear, hang out with us on vacation. So I'm glad to have everybody with us today. We've got a busy agenda, and on that note, I'm going to turn it over to Vanessa to give the housekeeping rules.
Okay, good morning. It's nice to see people in real life. We do have a virtual presence, as you can see from our surface. So a couple of things for those who are appearing virtually. If you're a member of the committee or a commissioner, you can leave your camera on. We ask everyone else turn them off just so that we can be sure we have the right interaction, because Teams is a little strange when it comes to what they show on video. We ask that virtually you remain muted unless you are speaking, with the exception of, well, no, let's just say that. If you want to speak, if you're a committee member and you want to unmute and speak and just chime in, 100% do that. There is still that raise hand function, which looks like a smiley face with a hand next to it, and you can do that, and we will be watching for that. But if you feel like your hand has been raised and no one is seeing it, and you're a committee member, chime in. And we won't use the chat. There's really no reason to use the chat unless you're having a technical difficulty, because we're all here. I'll remind everybody in here that the mic on this is pretty good. It picks up pretty well, but you do want to make sure that you are speaking up and cognizant of the fact that something is recording you, and how you do that in order for them to be able to hear. Everyone who's virtual, if you're having trouble hearing anyone in particular or in general, please speak up and let us know. It's been working pretty well, but I want everybody to feel comfortable to be like, hey, we can't hear, or hey, it's hard for, etc. Because this is still a little bit of a work in progress, as we can see from our projector screen.
I have just muted everyone on the on the call.
Okay, so everyone now is muted. So if you would like to speak on something as a committee member, you're going to have to unmute and then remute. And again, if you raise your hand, never forget you must unraise it.
Otherwise known as putting your hand down.
Fair.
We have this whole new vocabulary.
We
comes
do.
along with having Teams and Zoom and all these things that we didn't have 2 years ago. So, all right. Thank you very much, Vanessa. On that note, we will move to agenda item number 3, which is public comment, which we do have some public comment. I'm going to kind of lump 3 of these in together and then one off to the side. We have one from Shea Center, we have one from Mr. Baker and Charles Russell, all kind of talking about the conversations we've had before in this group, which is, what is the balance of experience and education necessary to become a broker's license, to obtain a broker's license? And so we've had those conversations. I think a lot of those echo what we've talked about in the past, but there are some interesting parts on this, I'm assuming everybody read the supplement, the point on the associate's degree. I think is kind of interesting. We had kind of talked a year ago, that we were not going to count a college degree towards education hours, right? Unless it was a real estate only degree. And so certainly something for us to revisit and take a look at, but I think it echoes a lot of the things that we had already really talked about. So if anybody wants to comment on those, Mr. Baker, if you want to comment on those, by all means.
I'll comment.
Go for it.
I don't think our conversation was the broker degree doesn't count. We talked about what courses within that degree that would count. and using the outline that Trek has already provided with regard to these types of education could count towards your qualifying education. So a degree in business might have a ton of coursework in there that would accrue towards the education required, while a degree in maybe criminal justice might not. Great degrees, but what coursework within that degree would relate to real estate education? And we've already got that outline that we're using, so I think.
And I think that we kind of used you as our poster boy for that
Yes.
conversation, right?
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
And if you want to, for the purposes of the people online, give the sheer numbers when it came to you getting your 930 hours.
Right.
How many experience points did you have?
Well, like 55,000.
Yeah, 55,000, which is kind of, in
So,
my opinion, silly.
so with regard to the associate's, I think the same thing for it.
Right.
What coursework within that associate's degree falls within the real estate related education?
It's just making a determination of what that looks like.
And I'll just add that this is a conversation that's happening internally, looking at the requirements and at the 4-year accredited degree, college, university. I think the associate's degree is an interesting question. So that conversation is happening internally. Just looking at the rule, looking at the statute, what's outlined there. And I think part of the step towards that will be that broker responsibility working group recommendation that you can move forward.
And I think that, the overall sentiment, correct me if I'm wrong, of this group has always been that we would favor experience in the field over education, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, there we go. And then our next one was an email.
Let me, can I interject, please?
Yes, sir.
And I agree that we have the experience over education. And I seem to remember that when we talked about education, it had to be pretty specific to brokerage, not just like in Charles Russell's example. He got an associate degree that was in something in science, which has nothing to do with being a broker. But I understand his thoughts here, so I think we agree to it. And I know we'll probably get to perhaps my other comments in here. I think we still struggle. I'm glad to hear we're doing something internally, because I think eventually, apparently, this will be a statute issue and an act of the legislature. But how we come up with the right experience, not just number of hours. I know we extensively went through those forms and we looked at how much credit we give for this, whatever, but to be able to have the experience you need to be a broker and essentially do 1 or 2 deals a year is silly. That's just, and I'll hold off to my other comments on what I said in my competency issue, but yeah, I agree that we certainly have experience over education, but I think we need to somehow address what that experience actually entails. But I'll hold off until we get to my other comments in there about the competency issue, and maybe part of that will be dealt with what they're doing in the broker responsibility course when we do item 6. So I don't know if that's going to be there.
It is.
Okay.
No. Mr. Warren?
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
I'm happy with our computer. But I was going to, and I may have missed a few sentences early on. Is there an opportunity, and it's just opportunity for us to recommend that there be some kind of a process that would allow maybe a committee or a group to get together and decide if there's an unusual circumstance like these two in the letters, that they could be sort of vetted separately, and there could be a process where a different determination could be made outside of the regulation for the number of hours for education and for experience. In other words, could there be a variance process set up to look at? I thought in the real estate rules in the real estate commission, the Real Estate Licensing Act, that there was some provisions in some of the sections that allowed for, a decision-making process outside of the particular requirements. And maybe the staff could sort of clarify that for me, or if it's not the case, just tell me that it's not, there's no such thing, or it's not possible. Would that help, Bob, some of the issues like these guys are bringing up?
It could. I'd be interested to hear from staff about if this is even a possibility or requires some future change in the statute to allow it and how that would be done. So it's an interesting idea.
Anyone from staff want to?
I have to
My understanding
apologize
is that the statute does not allow that, but I could be wrong.
I was talking to Abby about a technical issue, so I actually missed the bulk of that.
So the question is there a variance process? If somebody like Mr. Sales were to come in and have 55,000 experience points but not have the education, or one might outweigh the other?
No, there's not. And I think you want to think about that from a license standpoint, that you have requirements that are the same for everyone.
Right. Yeah.
And something to always think about too is, and I'm going to sort of preach this today a lot, which is when you're looking at changing or making recommendations to changing policy and requirements, they need to be, they have to be very well vetted and thoroughly thought out, and it's not a quick process, because if you say, okay, let's make this change to this, and you haven't considered all these other outlying factors, like you've made a change and you've somehow harmed all of these folks that you weren't considering. And so that's why, we really do that push and pull, and we work through things, and then we bring it back to the next meeting, we work through it again and make sure, like, hey, did we factor in all of this stuff? Did we look at this? Because these are big policy decisions that are affecting, approximately 200,000 license holders, and then all of the applicants. And so when you have, for example, on this, like a true license requirement, this is what you need in order to get a license. You don't want to be changing that all the time, because that's confusing, you're losing your consistency. And two, you've got to really think through every type of applicant, right? It's not just folks that are in there buying and selling, right? It's much bigger than that. And I'm saying that a little bit to lay the foundation for the conversation we're going to have later.
I think the conversation that we had as relates to this subject was finding some way to sort of level the playing field.
Yep.
When it came to education, so that people who didn't have a college degree weren't, quote unquote punished for not having a college degree, where people who had a college degree in, art history were getting credit where they really doesn't have a lot to do with real estate.
But we also want to consider the fact that right now in Rule, you've got that 4-year accredited degree, and if you take that away, you're taking away somebody else's access, the person who does have that education. It doesn't have to necessarily be that you take that part away, it's that you create that entry for the other person that you're considering.
Right.
Right?
Right. And then I think if I remember correctly, we talked about something like doubling the experience.
And that's going to be discussed at the workshop.
Yeah, so, very good. All right, on the flip side of that, and tying in, Mr. Baker gave us a great segue actually, was the idea of competency. And he mentioned some things in his email, and then we had a separate email that was sent to Commissioner Lerner, talking about apprenticeship. And if we can, what I would like to do is hold off on those discussions until we get to topic number 5 on our agenda, because that's the entirety of topic number 5. Who do I have with hands up? Lee, you want to talk?
Yeah, it was on a different subject. I wanted to make sure that you guys got through that one. I was just
Hold on, hang on.
on the agenda.
We gotta mute Bill. Oh, he did it, okay.
Okay, now go. Sorry.
Mine was just about, I wanted to speak on a non-agenda item, but I wanted to let you guys get through that conversation first, so.
We are through that conversation.
So my question is, at the last meeting that we had here, we had discussed, the property management options and whatnot, and kind of had spent a good amount of time in the last couple of meetings in regards to that. But it was my recollection at that last meeting that at that time, staff was going to go back and look at 2 or 3 different options that we could do and what that would take in order to make either one of those come to fruition, so that we could discuss those as far as what might be the best path to take. And then I was curious, because it doesn't show up on the agenda here, where that has gone. I just want to make sure that doesn't just disappear.
So Lee, that recommendation, as we had it, was to go to ESAC to open up the property management course outline, which at the most recent ESAC meeting, we discussed that recommendation and your concerns, and then they agreed to put it on the agenda for the next meeting, and I am sending them your comments. We're sending them that property management course outline to open it up and take a look at it, not only in light of your comments, but also in light of what's going on out there, what they're seeing. I think that that course hasn't been, the outline itself hasn't been looked at in a little bit. So it's going to pick that up at its next meeting in July-ish. I don't remember the date.
So we're just looking at possibly changing the course, and that's the extent of what we're looking at?
That's what we had as the formal recommendation out of this group, as I recall from the minutes.
I guess I remember that a little differently. I remember us discussing ESAC, but I also remember staff discussing going back, whether it was going to be creating a designation or whatever the case may be, and what that would take long term, if it was going to take a statutory change or if it was going to be a rule change, and staff was going to come back and let us know what those options were going to take, so that we could determine what might be, if it was going to be something that was going to take way too long, completely too convoluted, that we were going to stop doing that. But I don't recall that just being an ESAC thing.
I mean, in terms of a designation, that's gonna, I think that's gonna be a statutory change.
I think what you're talking about is having the checkbox we've talked about. Is that what you're talking about?
That was one of the options that we had discussed. But again, like I said, at the last meeting, it was said for staff was going to find out what it actually was going to take, and there were 2 or 3 different options given. One was the checkbox of the designation, designated property manager. The discussion we had last time was for staff to come back and determine what was going to take for those steps, so that if we'd have a clear idea of whatever path we chose, to know what we'd have to do.
So what I have in my notes about that from the last meeting was, 1, have a consumer document like ideas for consumers regarding what a property management company needs to do. 2, look into certification or a checkbox next to the name on track. 3, something like a broker's responsibility course, which Chase was going to go to ESAC, or somebody was going to go to ESAC about that. So those are the things
Right.
that we had discussed.
And so ESAC is looking at the property management course. I think we all agree a designation is going to have to be a statutory change recommendation to the commission. It's essentially a new license type or sub-license type. It's not something that the commission does with anything else. In terms of a checkbox, and I know that term came up a lot at the last meeting, I think you'd have to look and see, are you tying that to a designation? What would that be? I'm happy to, I can come back and report to this group. It's starting to get a little bit, I don't know. I can think about it, Lee, and I can visit with you, and I can report back to this group at the next meeting. I'm sorry if that's, if I didn't do what was asked. What I had for my recommendation was to take that to ESAC and open up that property management course outline as really the most tangible action item that was possible in this moment. for us to do, but Lee, I'm happy to look into it and bring it back to this group.
The whole goal for me was just to make sure that this doesn't kind of disappear. I think in the end, and I am completely open to different options and looking at it. I just think that the way it's set up currently, property manage, there's so little knowledge required for property managers, and as the market turns, we're going to get a lot of these agents that are going to be looking for ways to make money. They're going to go into property management. We're going to end up getting a lot of problems like we did back in 08 and 09. And anything that we can do to kind of help, curb that, to get a better quality property manager, I think we really need to look at.
Right, and so we can control that education component, right, through ESEC.
Right.
Right. This is Stalker. We also talked about the fact that, good morning, everyone, that we can't, just like she said, we cannot create a property management designation without it being statutory, because then we would also have to do one for commercial and then for farm and ranch and then for every other group. But if we control it by education, then that's within our purview. Otherwise, we're going to have to go to the legislature and they are going to have to create extra licensing, and that's not what they do because we're supposed to, our job, according to what we were told when we started, was to not increase the barriers. And so that would be increasing the barriers, but requiring a little bit more education, okay, or requiring a differentiation, okay, but creating a whole sub license within our license, I don't think that's what we were supposed to do. And that's just my 2 cents.
Soccer, I'll just go back to this, but I think what Lee is talking about is just the broker certifying that that person is doing property management. It's not actually a license. It's just saying, hey, I know that this is our property manager. This person is actually practicing property management.
Sure, and I think, so what we can do is I can circle back with Chance, I can circle back with Lee. It's not on the agenda for today. And we can see if it's something that'll be on the agenda for the next meeting. When we talk about adding check boxes, it's not like we have to think about it from the standpoint of who do we regulate, what can we do, what is the purpose of adding something. Now, if the purpose is, maybe outwardly facing, that is a more consumer protection based thing, and we're doing it for that reason, and we can shut, maybe, right?
Yeah.
But also, we need to stay within the bounds of what our jurisdiction is, what we're regulating, what we're looking at. And so when we add that stuff, those are the considerations that have to be made. But I will circle back with Chance and Lee, and if it's something for the next agenda, we'll have it on there.
Okay. Any other hands up? Nope, good, okay. All right, moving on from public comment now and into some discussion about a possible proposal to the commission by this group of a rule change that would mirror the language in 535.22 that requires a broker to respond to to sales agents, license holders, stakeholders within 2 calendar days. This would make the same true of all licensees essentially. So a license holder must respond, and this is just sample verbiage that was added, is that a license holder must respond to the license holder's principals, license holder representing other parties in real estate transactions within 2 calendar days.
And Abby can walk you through a little bit of the thought process behind it. I'm gonna say, well, Abby, you can say it too, but on the 2 recommendations that we anticipate getting out today, which is agenda item 4 and I think mentorship is 5.
Yes.
So the recommendations that come out of this meeting today are on the agenda for discussion at the commission workshop. So you would recommend, let's say, hey, this looks great, we love it. Or let's change this lane. I mean, that's the conversation right now, right? So whatever recommendation comes out of this is gonna go to workshop for the commission to, look at, digest, weigh in. any comments, feedback they have would come back to this group in July. If you wanted to make the recommendation to propose the rule change at the August meeting, that's when you would see that go out for a proposal. And the same is true on the mentorship recommendation. So we're gonna actually take these to the commission in that workshop setting so that they can sort of go back and forth and see what those recommendations look like. And I think that allows for better discussion of the recommendations that come out of this group versus it being the report and no one being quite sure what to do with that recommendation. This, I think, will allow a little bit more for that.
Very good. Bill, if you'll allow Abby to kind of give some background on what was written, we'll let you talk as soon as she's finished. If that's okay with you, sir.
Okay, so just a really brief background on this. So what we did, this is staff's first take, really preliminary draft, but basically what we did is we looked at the broker responsibility rule and thought, you know, we really probably shouldn't put something that applies to all license holders in the broker responsibility rule. So we pulled out the language that could apply across the board and then just created a new rule in the subchapter that deals with license holders generally. So this was kind of our first take at sort of forming what the idea here was, but happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Bill?
Yeah, thank you. And I know we talked about this a couple months ago, and I apologize for not remembering all the discussion, but I just had a couple questions. I don't have a basic problem with encouraging responsiveness in a timely manner to everybody, and I think it's appropriate. Mine's more a little bit of a technical issue. Is calendar days, and I'm just throwing these out for suggestions just to be thoughtful about it. Is calendar days really appropriate when we're talking about Saturdays, Sundays, holidays? Would it be maybe better to put in there 2 business days? The other question is, I wasn't really clear in the new language where it said that we must respond to a license holder's principals. Is principal? I don't really understand who principals are, what that means. Is that the client? Is that the license holder's designated supervisor or broker? And again, if it may be that I just don't understand the stuff, but it may be we may want to clarify that. And then and it is, I don't know if principles is a defined term in the rules. If that may be a way to solve it. If you all could clarify that for me, or feel like if that's something you want to address or think about in the work session.
Abby, you want to clarify the principles?
Yeah, so principles, it is used throughout our rules, and it's intended to include, you know, parties to a real estate transaction. So in this case, since it's license holders principals, it could be clients or it could be customers. It's trying to capture, you know, both of those individuals. So that was the intent there. As far as a definition, I don't know that principles is defined in 535. I mean, we can certainly consider that though.
What my question was, I just don't want to get folks tripped up with not giving, you know, being able to be responsive to all of the right parties, you know, and again, I just want to, if somebody says to me, I got to respond to them and there's multiple people in a transaction, I just want to make sure that it's clear to our folks that we're, you know, who they need to contact and what kind of response it is, so that we don't trip somebody up, you know, just for lack of clarification.
It seems to me the language is clear that a license holder must respond to their clients, their principal holders, and all other licensees. I like the calendar days versus business days because the contract language does not talk about business days. It talks about calendar days.
Exactly.
And so my responsibilities within the contract language are always calendar days. So I like this language a lot.
Yes.
I agree.
I agree with Brian.
Yeah, I agree. This is soccer in the hybrid world. I agree 100%. Calendar days, and it says a license holder must respond to. So you know who contacted you to ask you a question, so that's the person you respond to. And they're a principal, whether they are a customer without an agreement signed, or a client who has a listing agreement or a buyer's representative agreement. So, and any license holder, so that's your broker or anybody else involved in the transaction, just respond within 2 days, because we have people writing contracts. You write a contract, you give it to the agent on Monday, and it's Thursday. You've been calling, emailing, and texting, and you've gotten 0 response. So that's why that needs to be there. That's my 2 cents.
But this doesn't say principal.
That does.
In the second, in the new.
Second, on the blue section.
One section does.
The blue is the
Okay, I was
proposed,
looking at the
the
top.
blue is
Yes.
the proposed language.
Okay.
It also protects me from requiring to respond to the other agent's clients.
Correct.
So I think it's very applicable.
Yes, I agree.
I like
All right. If everybody is on board, the chair would entertain a motion to accept
So
this
moved.
recommendation to the
Second.
agenda. All
I
right.
think we all second it.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion passes. All right, well, that was easy. Well done. I like this, and I love the language because, like you said, it protects me from just a non-competent agent, which we're gonna talk about now, not his or her clients contacting me. And I just have to respond to my people, whether they're licensed or whatever. I think a lot of the aggravation, is, like Soccer said, you've got 80 offers on something and people just aren't calling you back, and then all of a sudden it goes, everybody's mad,
Yeah.
right? And so hopefully this will solve that problem.
I think Scott, Chair Kessner has,
Mr. Chairman?
You are
You are muted, sir. Still muted.
I think.
There we go. Oh, nope. Either your earbuds aren't connected or something, ma'am.
Try are you the 915 number? I think if you unmute your phone. I did.
Yeah.
Oh, now
Now we're liberating.
Now the system muted him again.
No, I think he did. Oh,
We can't.
we can't unmute.
Yeah, can't unmute, Scott. We can't hear you, ma'am.
Keep going.
Okay. Unless you want to try to unmute the phone.
You could type something into the chat and we'll read it.
The chat didn't work.
Oh, is the chat, did we disable it?
Mm-hmm.
Never mind. Okay.
Oh, there he's calling. He's already on. That 915-588 is him.
I don't know.
Is he playing with his phone and on his computer?
Oh,
I bet you is.
and as a reminder, just while we pass this time, this is just a recommendation, so it doesn't have to be perfect right now. The commission will workshop it, send it back to us if it needs anything. We'll propose it back in August. So we have some time here if there's some verbiage that needs to be added or anything else that the commissioners can do. I have stalled as long as I can.
We can circle
We can
back
always
too.
come back.
Yeah.
All right, big topic of discussion. There we go.
That's a good circle back.
All right. Big topic of discussion has been, and is going to be agenda item number 5. And so we are going to open this up with some kind of background and some expectation setting of what this discussion needs to look like from a number of different levels. But I'm going to turn things over to Vanessa to start us off.
Okay. Just like in
Procedurally.
school, take one and pass it along.
You allowed to lick your fingers in COVID times?
Yes.
I gotta know how to turn this on.
On the side?
You mean that on off thing?
Yes.
Oh, there's a switch
So
on the
weird.
side that says on off.
There it is. Okay. So everybody in virtual world, we are sharing the screen. Everybody in real world, we are handing out a piece of paper. There should be extra. And we do have 2 public comments on this topic. Do you want to take public comment first, or do you want to start here? Chance.
Let's take public comment first, actually. Okay, let's do that.
So you have 2, it should be in your agenda. You have 2 public comments. We've got Sherry and Armando. Oh, you have the old version.
All right, so Sherry and Armando, welcome to the meeting. Who wants to go first?
Thank you, I'll go first.
All right, go for it.
Can I sit down or?
However you want to, it's up to you.
Good, no, I'd rather
This is
sit
your
down.
question.
You'll just want to make sure you speak up because we've got to pick up.
Great, I was a cheerleader back in the day, so no.
Go for it.
Go for it.
Well, my name is Sherry Lewis and I am with RJ Williams and Company. And what I wanted to talk about was mentorship, and y'all's earlier discussion was about experience over education for brokers. Well, that goes into the same as for mentors going into with mentees. I've been in real estate now this year, will be my 5th year. When I first started in real estate, oh my goodness, I was so confused. Sure, they gave me a license, but I was like, okay, now what do I do? I have no idea. Just like I am now, I'm nervous. Well, back in the day, I was nervous as well, and I was like, who do I call? What do I do? How do I do it? Even though I was with a big brokerage, I didn't have anything. I didn't have anything really to go to. And my so-called broker, it's like, when am I going to talk to them? I don't know. And then leading into my second brokerage, which I was there for 4 years, certainly it was a smaller boutique style brokerage, but didn't have any training there either. With that being said, though, I think, in my opinion, a mentor is someone who is knowledgeable and has that experience and who can pass that along to a new agent, newer than I am. It's kind of like that Karate Kid, the Karate Kid and Mr. Miyagi. It's kind of like that, if you will, sort of. And that shows my age because that was my time frame. But anyway, I think the benefits for the mentor is, I know for myself, I have a board that I have in my office, it's my big why. Everybody has that supposedly. One of my big whys was being a mentor because I did want to give back. And what it means to me is giving back, teaching others, because that's the best way to learn as well for myself, is teaching others. Even though you have that experience, you have that knowledge, you are passing it along, because that's what we want. Become more confident as a leader. I know I went to University of Virginia for a week-long conference back in the day, and it was about leadership. Well, definitely when you're a mentor, you are a leader and you're a communicator and you're guiding and helping those mentees. And like Albert Einstein had stated, if you can't explain it to a 6-year-old, you don't understand it yourself. And as y'all know, whether it's a mentee that you're with or the general public, those people that are spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on a home, and if you can't explain a contract or whatever else you have to go, the addendum and amendment, are you really doing a good service not only for yourself but the public? I don't think so, and that's where I think a mentor is so important, I believe. And all the studying that I've done and the classes that I have done for real estate, I truly believe it being benefit for everyone, not only myself, but a mentor, a mentee, along with the general public. as well. And I think that's what we're all here for. is for them as well.
Awesome, thank you.
Well said.
Yeah.
Yes. Oh, and we're stronger together. That is even one of my colleagues here. She told me that this morning. I was like, oh my gosh, that is so true. We are stronger together. I know in real estate, we're always supposedly in competition. And I don't think we should be, but I think that's what everybody thinks. And we're not in competition. We really should be helping one another, whether you're with the same brokerage or not.
That's right. Listen, you already had me at Mr. Miyagi, okay?
Yeah, Mr.
I'm sold.
She's my Mr. Miyagi.
There you go. All right, we had one more?
Yes, well, good morning, everybody. My name is Armando. I'm with RJ Williams and Company as well. So Sherry kind of explained it from a mentor standpoint. I'm actually a mentee, so I'm, I guess, the living testament itself. So basically what I wanted to talk about was the mentorship and how it's an important juncture in a realtor's career. Reasons being, we're not taught real life scenarios in school, and the best way we can implement those real life scenarios are, you know, by the mentor teaching us the ways of how things are in the real life. Because in school it's just like paper, you know, book, this is what it is, you know, there's no like a diagram that says if A happens, go to B, and if B happens, you have C and D scenarios. You know, we don't get stuff like that at school. So this is a pretty good program that I think is very beneficial, like Sherry said, not only to us, the brokers, but also the public. To me, a mentor means somebody that provides knowledge, experience, and resources to the mentee. So that's definitely something that's important to me as well. So yeah, that kind of concludes what I wanted to say.
And showing, not only just that teaching, but actually, how do I open this door?
Right, the art and the science.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Thank you.
very good, thank you.
Then we had,
And kudos for getting involved in the
Right,
early
yes.
stages of your career. Well done, well done you.
Scott doing a little cheer over there.
Yeah.
we also have one written comment,
Yes.
and then, we have one written comment, so what we'll do is we're gonna factor in those comments that have been received into the so those comments didn't just get said and then nothing happens. But I will walk through this in a little bit, and what you all said, I think, is very applicable to what we're gonna walk through, but we do have one additional written comment that was in your materials. I cannot remember, the last name is Aaron Weiss, yeah. And if anyone has any comment on that, or she was advocating for, sounded like more of a formal apprenticeship.
Right. She's going for a 2-year mandatory apprenticeship. That's what her angle is there, so. All right, on that note, we're gonna get into this discussion. There are a lot of different ways that this discussion can go. And none of them is really off limits, but we have to think about, some of the parameters that Vanessa is going to lay out for us and what that would look like effectively in a big picture. And then we also have to look at some litmus tests that these proposals really have to pass to become realistic. And so I'm gonna let Vanessa start us off with kind of from a process standpoint, what would need to happen, and then we'll dive into the rest of the discussion.
Okay, hello, everybody. So at our last meeting, we started this conversation, and there was a request of like, well, what's gonna require what? What's a rule? What's a statute? And when we got to the commission meeting, Chair Kesner asked for a little bit of a matrix, right? Let's matrix all these ideas. Is it rule? Is it statute? What does that look like? Which sounds easy, but it's really not, because I tried to matrix it. But what we ended up doing, so I took my notes from the last meeting. I received comments from Brian, from Ty. I've had comments from Chance. I've had comments from Commissioner Lerner. And so took all of that and boiled it down to really 2 options as it relates to mentorship and the paths that you all were talking about with the, transactions versus time period. So I'm gonna walk through that. I will, full credit on this flow chart. Anyone who knows me, I did not make this. Abby did, and it's, I think, very helpful. I'm gonna walk us through it. I'm gonna say some stuff over and over again because I think it's important. Or I'll have forgotten that I said it. But before I even start that, I think it's important to note that the issue of mentorship will likely not be solved with one single action that comes out of this group, right? Chelsea says this often, that this will be one of many tools that can be used. And I think an important one. But are we going to solve the issue of people not knowing what they're doing out in the world today? No. Are we ever going to solve it? No. Do we have the potential to move the needle on that? Yes. We're going to look at options today that talk about rule changes and options that talk about statutory recommendations to make changes to statute. I will tell you a rule change is easier because rulemaking is done here at the commission level. Rulemaking does, especially as it relates to this topic, does likely, almost certainly implicate the Governor's Office of Regulatory Compliance. If they do not.
What is that?
That is a group that was created, I believe, out of the last legislative session. And they take a look at the rules that have potentials to, the potential to increase barriers to entry. They look to make sure that there's not issues with antitrust, which basically we have a commission of license holders, and are they rulemaking from the perspective of benefiting not themselves necessarily, but maybe, right? What are their interests, and why are these rules actually being put out there? Is it for consumer protection, or is it because that's getting in the way of my business and I don't like it, and I don't like this new model, et cetera, right? Because you don't want that. You never want that in government. So they're a little bit of a check, and that comes out of a case out of North Carolina that has to do with teeth whitening. It's a great case, you should read it. But it's a similar situation where you had dentists on the board that were essentially not letting competition in. And so the Governor's Office of Regulatory Compliance, once they're implicated, and you're going to see that when you start increasing requirements typically, which adding additional transactions, additional time period, you're starting to increase what folks have to do, and that's not a no, but it is an increase. That implicates regulatory compliance, and under statute, we cannot pass a rule. We cannot, there will be no rule without the Governor's office saying yes. We get a formal letter from them saying you may proceed with adopting this rule. And that, it runs in conjunction with the rulemaking process. We'll handle that part. We may get written comments back from them. Very often, they have a whole set of factors that they have to play out. The one I'm gonna highlight right now is they will ask, what's the data behind this? Why are you doing this? What are the problems you're seeing? Show us the numbers of why you're making a change that's gonna make it harder for people to be in this business, or that's gonna change what they have to do as opposed to what they did have to do, right? Why are we increasing what they're doing in those first 2 years? So that's just, they have statutory factors that they have to consider. They lay it all out. They're going to ask us for the data behind the rule changes, right? Why this recommendation? What are we doing here? Okay, so that's rulemaking, but I'm saying that, and that's still something that lives here, right? It lives at the agency. Statutory change, I think everybody knows, gosh, what an unpredictable situation that can be, because that's the legislature. So you could have the greatest idea in the whole world for a law change, and it never makes it anywhere. And it has nothing to do with all of the great reasons you had for doing it. Other times, it can totally make it through, and it's awesome, and it's great, and we need to think, okay, did we really think through every possible scenario? Because that is now the law, we have to do it, and the way that it's written has a lot of implications, so let's really think through what that legislation looks like and what the ideas behind it were. I'm not gonna get into the full scope of how you get things to the legislature. Let's just say there's a lot of folks involved, there's stakeholder input. We as an agency cannot lobby, right? We can be a factual resource. And so it's not impossible. I don't want anyone to think that when I walk through this stuff today, I anticipate a recommendation on one of these two options. But I will always say, okay, statutory change probably harder, right? Less control. Rule change easier, not full control. And again, this is all going to the commission who's got to say, we love it. So those are kind of the two paths, and I will also say, I do anticipate a recommendation coming out of these, but I'm gonna do what I do, which is I'm gonna point out on both of them where your considerations are. And that's my job. So I'm not to be honest, I'm not even necessarily pro, right? Because I'm just applying this truly from the legal perspective and what potential considerations you have to make realistically speaking. So don't think that I'm like, no, this is just me having to raise this stuff. This is what I say. I'm super fun in real life, but in my job, I'm typically like, well, have you thought about this? I don't know if that's I'd like to be more cautious, right? Real life, I'm not like that, I'm super fun. So just remember that as we walk through this, okay? And then the only other thing, because I know this group, and you guys are gonna have ideas right and left. And we boiled this down. Ty is probably like, I had 700 other bullet points in my notes, where are those, right? I did not put them in here because I'm trying to get a recommendation out of this group that we don't start getting caught in all of this, right? However, I know all of this is coming, okay? I can see it in Ty's eyes. I'm gonna write notes. We're gonna parking lot those ideas. We're not gonna get into them yet, but throw them at me to the extent you feel, oh gosh, what about this? And they can be considerations, etc. So let's do it. I'm gonna take us down the two paths of mentorship that we currently. I think Chair Kessner is back. So I'm going to start, you have this in front of you, no one has seen this prior, I just handed it out, it should be up on your screen. If you can't see it, let me know, we'll scroll down as we need to. I got a little laser pointer that I don't know how to use.
It's not the bottom button.
It is on.
This is like low tech, Vanessa.
Bottom button.
I'm always the bottom button. Oh, look at that. Look at that. That's to do the.
Don't do the one that's a screen.
Anyone have a cat? Okay, so I'm gonna start us on the left side. But I will tell you, it breaks down into two different categories. Left side is review of a certain number of transactions. I'm gonna walk through the terms we use in just a second. Right side is tied to review of transactions over a certain time period. Okay, so those are your two paths. I'm gonna start over here. And I'm gonna walk through a little bit of the terminology we used here. So I have in here sponsoring broker and delegated supervisor. I do not use the word mentor, and here's what I will tell you. Nearly every single definition that you all gave me of a mentor is a broker or a delegated supervisor, right? So that's who they are. That's who they should be. Yeah. So I think what you all are talking about is what you're seeing in the field, but the system is there. So they must review a certain number of offers. Okay, why did we use offers? Because it indicates an initialness to the transaction, right? Because there was that question of like, at what point does the supervision come in? And if you're signing off here, what does that mean for all the stuff that's come beforehand? Right, okay, so we put offers. Also includes transactions. Remember what I talked about earlier? We need to think about every applicant or every license holder and what they do. Not everyone is out there listing houses. right? They're doing different stuff. So if we're talking about transactional supervision, we need to be broad and let that happen. And we can't force somebody to buy and sell houses. No. What if they don't want, what if that's not what they have that license for? So we're trying to be really deliberate in how we think about this. So so it's a certain number. I don't have a number in mind. I'm gonna continue to use the number 5 because that's the one that pops into my head. And I do not care if it's 5 or not. It's just an easy number for me to go 5. So must review a certain number of offers, example 5, prior to submission and acceptance. Okay, so this is weird. We're gonna kind of scroll down to this middle box. I know that you folks, I'm trying to walk you through this virtually. So now we're at that middle box that says, do you want the commission to require submission of a log or documentation of these reviews? Okay, I'm gonna put that to the side for a second because there's gonna be some consideration and discussion points on this. But for this one, we don't need to worry about it just yet, okay? So if you want it to be a review of a certain number of offers, we're going down to rule change, right? So this, a rule change would come to that 535.2. Right now you have coaching and training on the first transaction, right? So you would, as Chance says, you would put a number in there between first and transaction. I'm not quoting it exactly right. So that is a rule change. And this group is going to want to talk about, okay, what are those, what's that sweet spot in terms of numbers? I'm going to walk you through some considerations before we get to discussion of that sweet spot in numbers, because I'm going to bring something up I'm going to bring a few things up that should inform where you start thinking when it comes to those numbers. I will say, this path took us to rule change, which, as I mentioned earlier, internal, maybe easier. Well, definitely easier. Simpler, yeah. So considerations. Regulatory compliance, I just mentioned that. They're going to look at it, they're going to ask us why, they're going to ask us for the data. The why, consumer protection, we hear lots of public comments, etc. The data, we mentioned this before, the actual enforcement data on this is tricky, in that we just don't, the complaint age we get, I'm going to speak for Mike here, and I'm sure he's pumped, he loves when I speak for him, is the most common agent age or license holder age is someone who's held their license for 7 to 8 years, is that right? 7.8 years? Okay. So your complaint data that we have as checked that we could produce is not going to show it's first-time agents. I'm not saying that first-time agents are not messing things up. I was once a first-time lawyer and I messed a lot of things up. But
there's complaints that are first-time people.
There are complaints,
but the overall average. The
overall average, right? Where are we seeing the problems? If we were to identify, if you wanted a chart, it would look better at the 8-year range. But that's something they're going to ask us about, and we'll provide the background, we'll provide the data, we'll answer the questions that they have. I just want to point that out. Like I said, this is the part where I'm not fun. Stakeholder buy-in. Okay, so you've got lots of stakeholders whenever you want to pass a rule, right? You've got the commission, yeah. You've got the commission itself, right? Because they're going to vote on whether to move forward. You've got associations, you've got local associations, you've got, I'm not as great with the associations. You've got your local sort of city associations, you've got Texas Realtors, which is sort of the bigger one, as I understand it. I'm not in the world, sorry. This is what I figured out in my 2.5 years here. And then you've also got your license holders, and let's never forget members of the public, right? So we're going to open this rule up for public comment, and we would anticipate receiving comments from all those folks and seeing what do people think. So that is always an important one. Here's the one where I was talking about 5, the number 5 and the specific number. something to consider that I understand is very important to everyone out in this industry is independent contractor status. So let's talk about that. If you move that number from 1 to 5, cool. If you move that number from 1 to 75, what is that doing to your independent contractor status? Is that starting to look more like an employer-employee situation, that constant supervision, et cetera? You just want to think about that when you're looking at these numbers, because as I understand it, that is a very important concept out in the industry and something that folks are very intent upon preserving. I understand that from an employment perspective. So that's just a thought, right? This last one, enforcement, you always want to think about how a rule would be enforced, and I think we'll get into a little bit of this when we talk about documentation. If there's no documentation, or if there's like how are we as an agency, what are we going to do with this rule? What does the complaint look like? Does it fall better? I mean, I think Mike, typically we handle something like this right now under a negligence standpoint. If we're gonna add in this extra thing, which I think sends a signal to brokers like, hey, this is important. The commission wants to do this, right? They are upping this, they're seeing the problem, we're getting that messaging out. This is something that we internally are always going to think about of like, how do we enforce something? It's really hard to prove something didn't happen. It's like if you're trying to research something that doesn't exist, I don't know if you've ever had to do this, but like, hey, is there a regulation that says everyone has to wear polka dots on Wednesday? Good luck, because that regulation does not exist. And you will just spend 45 days in Westlaw for me or on Google trying to find this thing that doesn't exist, and it's awful. So from an enforcement standpoint, it's really nice to have a way to enforce. We will think about that. We are going to be informed by the documentation conversation that's had. But from both an enforcement and licensing perspective, internally staff has got to make sure it practically works from a licensing agency standpoint. All right. I know, Ty.
So first question, and I'm just wanting to make sure. So you're saying on the delegated supervisor checkbox, that if we utilize that to say, hey, each mentor must be a delegated supervisor, are you saying that that is easy to do?
I'm not talking about a checkbox right now.
Only because it's already there.
I think she's saying don't use the word mentor. Let's stick with the language we have.
Right, so we stick with that. We stick with delegated supervisor. And then what you're saying is.
Can I read the language?
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Just so we're clear. So the actual rule states, the broker must require that the sales agent receive coaching and assistance from an experienced license holder competent for that activity. So that's what we're talking about.
Right.
Not a checkbox, not a supervisor, just what exists now.
I'm going down the road of enforcement, and I'm going down the road of identification.
And I think as we get into the discussion, we go that way. But for now, that's what this is the rule. This is
right what we're looking at. Yeah.
I have two questions.
Yeah.
One is, when you said offers, I heard you say it, but I didn't catch it. How does that encompass listings? Like listing paperwork? Like if I were going to prepare a listing for a client, I would still want, like especially for several, I would want to see my agent's paperwork before they present it to that client.
Yeah, so I think when we use the term offer here on this, it's just the initiation of the transaction. It's at the beginning.
What you're talking about would be covered.
And I would interpret that from both the buyer side and the seller.
Yeah, and so this language, right, this isn't.
This isn't official language.
This is not official language. The thought was to try and make it, instead of it be like transaction, because then people are thinking, well, that's like the actual passing of paper between folks or the payment of money. We're trying to say the beginning.
Okay, and the second question is, and maybe Chair Kessner can talk about this a little bit too, is if we had the broker sign off on the paperwork, and which I think was done years ago too, like there's a line for a broker, Would that take care of all of this?
I think that would,
I think it would help document
Yeah.
enforcement, everything.
two foundational statements I'd like to.
Let me just, can I say something to this? We're gonna talk about documentation in a second. What I would say to keep your mind open about, not every transaction looks the same. Not everyone's using a truck contract form. Not everyone is even doing a buy-sell. So what does it look like? I think we can provide the documentation. That's gonna be that conversation. I mean, you gave us something that I think is probably a pretty good foundation in terms of tracking things or certifying, attesting, et cetera. We need to make sure that that process works with the new database we're putting in. We need to make sure it's practical. We have the staffing, what does it actually look like, et cetera. But I think what we're doing here, before we even get to, hey, what is that gonna look like in terms of documentation, is we're saying that supervision starts at the beginning. And I'm sorry, Brian.
Oh, that's okay.
And I'm gonna write.
The two foundational statements.
Item.
I mean, the idea here, if y'all remember from we briefly touched on this in our last meeting, is if it gets to a compliance officer after documents are already signed, we're too late.
Yeah.
Right, we're too late.
Yeah.
And so, and I mean, that's for the brokers that have a compliance officer. But if we get it and it's in front of a consumer, you know, we've already done the consumer a disservice, we've done the new licensee a disservice. And so I think that use of the word offer and all that at the beginning is just initiating a transaction. And it's any document related to. So as we kind of flesh out what that looks like today, we can switch those words around.
So those two foundational statements that are probably too simple and therefore are dumb, but all licensees must be sponsored by a sponsoring broker. I guess the why behind that is related to consumer protection. So the commission's intent is to protect the consumer by requiring that all licensees or all sales agents be sponsored by a broker. That's gotta mean something, right? That sponsorship's gotta mean something as it relates to consumer protection. The second statement would be, as identified on the IABS, sales agents work with consumers on behalf of their broker. So all of these relationships are broker to consumer. Correct. And sales agents are the middle.
Mm-hmm.
And so and that's what we're trying to do here is, I really don't want to say raise the bar. Because we're yeah.
I think what we're trying to do is,
I don't think any of the conversations that we're having are raising the barrier or increasing the barrier into the real estate.
I think what we're trying to do is ensure that the consumer interacts with somebody competent to do their job.
Yes.
We're talking about things that really raise the level of compliance for that licensee as it relates to their work on behalf of the broker with that consumer. So,
yeah,
like I said, probably.
No, I think that's great. No, I think that's great. And I think getting back, right, the established, I don't know, the establishment, I don't know how to best say it. You're right. It's broker, consumer. Right. And it sounds like what we hear from this group and around,
absentee
right,
broker.
is what's happening in the middle, and absentee brokers, you're right, we hear that. And so what you all are looking at is, okay, yeah, how do we maintain or oversee what's happening in the middle, for lack of a better term?
And my thought is, just throwing it out there, I'm 100% on the sign off for the offers and for listings. If we just added that line to a contract or to an offer or to a listing or whatever it may be, I think if it was signed off by a delegated supervisor, a broker, then if it ever goes to enforcement, then Mike has some more teeth. He can sink in and say, hey, you know what, this offer is horrible, and you looked over this, Mr. Broker or supervisor, and that's really the crux of the whole thing. I think that would solve everything in my mind.
Well, let's hold that thought.
Okay.
Let's have her go down road number 2.
Yeah,
And then let's
and
open this up and throw all these ideas on the table. Because I think that's where, when everybody starts throwing stuff on the table, that's where we're gonna come up with something.
it's officially parked. What does sign off look like, right? And again, everybody thinks super broad. Talking about all of our license holders and all of the things, well, no, I guess not all of our license holders. We're talking about all of our brokers and agents and what are they doing out in the real world that might be different than what you do or where you see the main problems, because you're putting in a requirement that's for everyone.
So we can't take with our page 9 hats.
I don't even know what that means. Yeah, don't think with your page 9 hats. I'm gonna start saying that. I'm gonna put it in my email signature and then our communications person's gonna get mad at me. I'm kidding. Okay, so that is path number 1. I wish we could have drawn this out as like a little path, but I did not.
This is good.
I was already at Abby's Mercury.
Abby did a great job.
Yeah. Okay, so let's move to the next one. And I'm gonna explain the terminology and how we got to the terminology here. Okay, so I'll start with the offers, same deal, right? Delegated supervisor, sponsoring broker, same deal. First 2 years of licensure. So there was some conversation at the last meeting related to what if we apply it to the SAE time period? I've received a few comments to that effect, and so SAE is really an education requirement, and I think a lot of people think of it as like, no, it's that first 2 years. In part because I think it's titled weirdly, hopefully that's gonna change. But really what it is an education requirement. You can actually complete, I learned this from Jennifer, a lot of providers offer course packages that allow you to complete your SAE before you even get your license. So it's really just an hour requirement that has to be done before your renewal. If you are, and we have a similar sitch with the bar, right? And so I completed my SAE like my first 2 weeks because I did not want that hanging over my head. So when you think of it that way, it's like, oh gosh, wait, we don't want to tie it to that because what if you first of all, tying it to coursework is weird. It would just be like them providing certificates being like, I don't need this anymore because I did this. But I also don't think it's what you actually intended to do. I think what that conversation is during the first 2 years of licensure, because we're talking about new agents, right? So during that first 2 years of licensure, that the broker or supervisor would sign off on the offers. So there's no number there. It is a time period. And we've set it at 2 years based on everything that we got from you guys. It seemed like that's it. It's that initial term, right? So, okay, we're gonna go down to, do you want the commission to require submission of a log or documentation of these reviews? Side note, what will staff do with this documentation? We're gonna talk about that very soon. So if your answer is no, that's a rule change. Same considerations, etc., right? Because there you've got, okay, broker, it's your responsibility during the first 2 years of this person, of any of your, if you have an agent who's within their first 2 years of licensure, you are signing off on all of their offers, right? And I know that's not perfect language. Okay, think about it a little bit. What if somebody switches in their first 2 years? What does that look like, et cetera? We would have to hash that out. But let's just go with the simple example of first 2 years, you're getting all your transactions signed off on by a broker agent. Okay, and if you don't want required documentation, rule change. Great. Okay, let's say you do want required documentation, which I'm guessing from this group you do. And I get it, because I think there's an enforcement component that makes sense with that. Yes. Do you want this to be tied to renewal? So somebody cannot renew unless they have provided the documentation, the required documentation, whatever that looks like, that all those transactions have been signed off. in their first 2 years prior to renewal. Okay, so if you are tying that to renewal, that's a new license requirement, right? It's a new renewal requirement, and you are going to need a statutory change. What we said earlier about statutory changes, not impossible, less in our control. Something that, you know, there would be participation from TREC standpoint as a factual resource, et cetera. On this, you're going to, again, face a lot of the same hurdles, considerations. See, I'm always negative, considerations. In that, similarly, and this is a really good thing what I'm about to say, the legislature does not just willy-nilly change things, right? They need the data. They need to know why they're making these changes. And you most definitely want that because you don't want willy-nilly lawmaking. I hope that gets used officially in some capacity. You don't want that though, because then it's gonna be, okay, legislature just passed a law that says that everyone has to wear polka dots on Wednesdays, and nobody even thought about the fact that I have to wear a uniform to work every day, and I can't wear polka dots. Or now the police are gonna have to order all these new polka dot uniforms. I mean, I know it's a silly example, but like we really gotta think every single possibility. Stakeholder buy-in, same. You're gonna need input buy-in from the commission. You're gonna need it from all of the associations. I mean, you're not gonna need it, you're gonna probably want it, right? Associations are out there, they're talking to the legislature. You're gonna wanna look at that independent contractor status, because right now you've got just constant supervision in that first 2 years. I don't know that we've fully like fleshed that concept out as it relates to this, but it's a consideration that would have to be made. What about agents that renew inactive, right? What about the folks that aren't engaging in transactions in their first 2 years? There are tons of reasons somebody would want to do that.
At least one person at this table would fall into that.
This guy, it's the Mike Malloy rule, right? But he uses his license for a completely different reason than anyone else here in this room uses their license for. Some people just want their licenses. Some people only want to do, you know, transactions for their, you know, close friends, and so they don't have, you know,
Chair
whatever.
Kessner has a good example. He has some folks in his office who are licensed, not because they transact, but so that he doesn't have to worry about who's licensed and unlicensed,
Yeah.
right?
Or
Compliance officers out there.
yeah, I was gonna say, yeah, or like I think somebody had mentioned like their accountant holds the real estate license, is it you chance?
So you can serve as expert witness.
So they know what's, yeah, expert witness, right? That's like a whole industry, guys. So, yeah, that's why Mike is our expert witness, Mike and I. So that's that inactive status renewal component. It's not an impossible hurdle, it's just consideration, and there's probably a way to structure it that encompasses that. And then, okay, ensuring equal supervision. So if you are just doing a time period, this is actually the point I was making earlier, go ahead. If you are tying it to time period and not a number, then what about, how does it feel in terms of achieving the goal if you've got somebody who has had 30 transactions in their first 2 years versus somebody who has had 1? It's the same sign off, it's the same 2-year period. So in terms of renewal, it's the same, but they've had 1 transaction versus, you know, 200, and you're getting different levels of supervision. It's just a consideration, right? Okay, cool. I'm gonna go to, do you want this to be tied to renewal? No. Okay, so this is a rule change
and possibly a statutory change. Did I just say that right? Yes, I did. This is the one that for me is the hardest to explain, and Abby says it best of like, think IABS Consumer Protection Notice. So just writing in that requirement that you maintain the sign off and it can be provided, et cetera, but it's not tied to somebody's renewal period.
You're not submitting it unless
Right.
requested.
Right. And I will go, I feel like I really botched statutory change real quick. Let me just add one thing. If you are tying to renewal and you are creating a new requirement under that license and that supervision, you're getting real close to apprenticeship, to an alternate license, to a new category of apprentice agent. And when you do that, you start raising the hackles, thinking of my dog, of the folks who are like, no, we're trying, no barriers to entry, like the market will take care of things, less regulation, not more regulation, what are you guys doing, right? And that's not me, I have no stake in this. And those are the paths. Does anyone want to talk about this prior to going to my last blue circle of what will staff do with this documentation?
Chair Kestner had a comment. Chair, do you want to try to say it? And if not, I'll read what you just texted.
Yeah, can y'all hear me?
We can.
Yes, yay!
I like the number on 5 or whatever number you decide on. I don't like the 2 years. We had an agent do 11 transactions the first year, 93 or 94 the second. He did not need my supervision, so I like the number. Tying to renewal, I think it's going to be very difficult. The last agent we hired, all he does is do acquisition and 6-month inspection photos on property management. He will never do a transaction. We hire him strictly as a staff person with a license, just in case they mention something about real estate. We want to be covered, and our administrative assistants are licensed. So tying it to the renewal is going to be very hard as far as renewing it. But I like the number of transactions. The 2 years I think is a little tough. I just don't see that. But I like the number of transactions. I like the way it's laid out. I don't think it would hurt to try to document it somehow. And what the staff does with it, that's up to y'all. And I'm going to have to get out in a little bit, but I just wanted to throw that in. I like the number of transactions, but time to renewal is going to be tough.
Thanks, sir. And just to circle back, because of the comment you tried to make earlier, I don't want to speak for everybody at this table, but I'm gonna. We weren't trying to get rid of the broker not having to call back. We were just adding the agent in.
Good. I saw it marked out. I just think anytime we can tell the broker time and time again what they're responsible for, it's a good thing.
Yes, sir.
We're just moving it out of broker responsibility rule and making
Keep
it.
the broker responsible for it, but then add.
But we're striking some of that and then down, it's encompassing license holder, which.
So everybody.
Yeah.
Soccer off.
So you're right, some of it's staying and then some of it's moving.
Soccer had it.
Okay. I'd like to leave it there too. All right. Thank
Yeah.
y'all.
Hello, hey guys. I agree with Mr. Kestner, Chairman Kestner. With the 5 numbers in the documentation, what will the staff do with it? It could actually just be a mandatory form that the broker has to sign at the time of renewal that says, I have reviewed at least 5 transactions for this new agent for this 2 years. And then that's the only documentation that and then 93 the next. That's over 100 pieces of paper that has to be turned in to the commission. And what are they going to do with that? That's a lot. So just maybe a form that says I have I have monitored the 5 or 7 or however many number of transactions for the year would be sufficient without having to get one for each one.
So like an attestation.
Yeah, basically.
So let me ask one question. It sounds like we're starting to move into documentation, and so unless somebody has something else, do we need to take a break? Like a 5-minute break before we do that?
Yes, Holly's saying yes.
Okay, so.
It's 11:31, let's be back 11:40.
Yeah, 11:40, good for everybody?
11:40, please.
And you can study up.
Everybody can hear us? We're gonna get back to work. It's 11:40. All right, so do we want to talk about what happens with documentation real quick?
Before we do,
Or do we not?
one comment.
Go.
Yeah.
I think as you've laid it out, I want to make the observation that this raises the bar for the broker or the delegated supervisor. This isn't necessarily raising the bar for the licensee or that sales agent. It's just placing a higher level of responsibility for the broker, the designated supervisor, to supervise.
And I would, just to tack onto that, because I think it's a very good comment, I think that solves the problem of the independent contractor dispute
Yes.
right out of the gate.
100%.
It makes it completely go away. If we're putting the regulation on the broker and not the agent, the independent contractor argument goes right out the window immediately.
Agreed.
Unless you're time.
Killjoy it.
I know, I told you guys. Unless you're tying it to your agent's renewal.
Right.
Right, because then you're increasing. And depending on the number you fall on, if you go to number of transactions, I don't think, from what I hear, I don't see you guys heading in a direction that's, the first 50 transactions, whatever. I don't see that, but I feel like I need to point it out. I'm gonna add one more thing and then Ty, I see you.
Yeah.
I would ask Ty to stand, but I'm not going to. For those of you who are not here.
Ty can put all 5 of his appendages out.
Ty has got a really great leg brace going. And I'm just toying, I'm just messing with him, he knows that. So what you just said, Brian, I think is correct except for one thing, which is we are still looking broker to agent. So that delegated supervisor is not going to be extra accountable under this. It's going to be the same as it is. Now, if they're, as I understand it, Mike, you just said it better than I did, but if they're like somehow extra involved in whatever the scenario is and they can be tied into the complaint,
Independently. Because we tie them in, we tie the broker by virtue of statute.
Right.
And there's no mention of delegated supervisor at all in the statute. So when we have to look at it from responsibility perspective, it's sales agent, broker. If there's someone in between, even though by rule we say you can kind of give some responsibilities to it, but the rule also says ultimately the broker's responsible. A judge is going to look at the statute and say, I don't see designated supervisor here. It may be in your rule that they can delegate a little bit, but I don't see unless you can independently prove that they were negligent on their own behalf while performing some sort of brokerage activity and approving a contract. It may not be brokerage activity that you're getting compensation for. But they're not necessarily getting compensated for that transaction. That's another hiccup you get in there as well. So.
But it's the broker's responsibility on who they assign as a
Yeah, and I can say, well, it's
still his decision.
It's still the broker.
The broker can get mad at their supervisor and take care of that in an employment context.
You picked the wrong person.
But just to make clear, we're still ensuring, which is like you said, Brian, like the real goal here, broker agent. Okay, Ty.
Okay, so here's my thought. I was, processing this whole thing, and I'm throwing it out there. I think it'd be really cool. So let's just say, because I noticed what we have up here, if we go the number route, and we just say 5, we'll stick with the 5 number. But here's the caveat to how to do this even more interestingly, is we say prior to execution, There's no proof, there's no proving, okay? My point is if you say prior to execution, you sign off, broker must sign off prior to execution of offer, right? Because you're making an offer prior to execution. That way, when it becomes executed, that's one of your 5. Do you get what I'm saying?
I get what you're
he's saying is, he's saying you could have 10 offers on one transaction.
Right.
And your broker or designated supervisor,
Right now.
Oh, yeah.
use all of them, you're done. And so I think it ought to be per transaction, regardless of the number of
So
offers.
the wording I came up with was before presenting to consumer, because then you're not talking about a
That's a good one.
contract, it could be a listing agreement, it could be.
A lease.
Can I throw my 2 cents in there? You want to talk about documentation yet or no?
We
Where,
can.
like what would happen from a staff standpoint? Do you wanna
Yeah,
talk about that?
so I'll say, I think we can address the language component in rulemaking. So I'm writing these ideas down, but like Abby and I will hash out what that looks like and how it encompasses every component to it, but it's helpful to hear the ideas on it, so.
And really not turning in, I'm gonna, in my mind, after hearing your presentation, which was very thorough and good, I would say let's just cross out turning in documentation to the commission, turning it in, and we just leave it in the broker's hands, where the broker says this amount of transactions, you guys are backing up as a rule change, backing up the broker saying, hey, look, this works this way. We have a sign off, but it must be signed off on prior to or presentation to consumer or prior to execution. That way we can cover all bases until those 5 are actually done and completed and executed. Then we're covered as a broker. We have some teeth.
I'm gonna present what I think is the most elegant solution to this.
Okay.
And I don't know, and like we already said, this is step 1 in what's probably a longer and more involved process. But I think that there is a really, really simple solution to this question. Abby, would you please pull up 535.2 on the screen? So if you look at 535.2, I-5, which says, in addition to completing statutory minimum continuing education requirements, each blah, 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 but it says, at a minimum, when a sales agent performs a real estate brokerage activity for the first time, the broker must require that the sales agent receive coaching and assistance from an experienced license holder competent for that activity. What I would like to see is the highlighted portion of this become its own subsection of this and stick the word 5 in between first and times, but add a second subsection to this that says prior to the delivery to the consumer/client, what principal, whatever we want to call that role in the transaction, of any documents related to these first 5 transactions, a broker or a person experienced license holder competent for that activity will ensure accuracy, whatever that language looks like. I'm not a lawyer, but I think if we just take those 2 things, it's a really easy.
It's just slam dunk.
Yeah.
But what
Yeah,
what
agreed.
if somebody has 5 rentals, hadn't sold anything, and has no clue how to sell anything?
Because it's one activity, they're different activities.
Wait,
So
what?
renting is an activity, buying and selling is an activity.
Well, I think you have to define activity.
First 5.
It's already in the statute.
It says
Read
activity.
it again, sorry, where does it say that?
At a minimum, when a sales agent performs a real estate brokerage activity for the first time.
I don't
Oh.
So
think
leasing is different than buying and selling, is different than
But I
farm
think
and
you
ranch,
have
is
to
different than geographic competency.
Maybe you give the
Any of
definition of
those things.
activity.
Yeah,
Can you say that?
activity needs to be defined.
Is that defined anywhere in statute? Abby says yes.
Activity is anything that requires a real estate brokerage license, correct?
But how is somebody gonna say, oh, listing versus buying versus rental, it's different.
They're all different activities.
Right, but I
But
think,
there's still activities and you would need
Covered
somebody
under-
to,
Because if reading on, when you say that the sales agent receives coaching and assistance from the experienced license holder competent for that activity. So if it's farm and ranch, if it is management, property management, leasing, I think that just like James is saying, that it encompasses exactly what we need with just some tweaks to it.
But I do think a lot of people are
But I
going
get
to, I didn't catch it the first time.
It
so I
shouldn't
think
be
it's
all
gonna go.
activity.
Yeah.
It's just
I know.
a specified activity, and this is, so when we get to section 6, I was
Yes.
gonna make this joke, but I'll make it now. It's hard not to call people incompetent. We've been writing the book for broker responsibility course. We've been like, oh, well, we have all these people who are incompetent, but they're not incompetent, they're just not competent for that activity.
Right.
Because they've never done it before, right?
Right.
So trying to wordsmith incompetent into something not as insulting,
You're
has been
also,
interesting.
you're also introducing a new person there though, and an experienced person in that activity.
Right, but not
Where we've
necessarily
been
delegated
talking
supervisor.
Designated supervisor.
Right, this is just somebody, like for instance, if I have one of my agents who comes to me and says, hey, I've got a past client who wants to do a commercial lease. Do you know anything about commercial leases? Well, no, I don't. Great, we have agents in our brokerage who specialize in commercial. I put the two of them together, they work on a referral transaction. Go, because that's the fiduciary duty to the client, right?
And that fits the rule. It does not fit the simplified paths that we created because we were just trying to really create, hey, these are the options. The language that's in the rule, I think, does contemplate what Chance just said, right? Okay, well, here's this person that we have that does do this type of stuff. So we wouldn't remove that. And we can take, like I'm writing this down, like I said, the rule drafting components, the changes, we will take your input and your ideas and tinker, that's the legal term for it. Tinker with it in the interim. Should all this move forward, you would see that in July and then be like, well, why would you do this, Or we'll say, well, we heard your concern on this and we're doing that, we'll have that conversation.
So, Chance, are you saying we utilize that, and we also utilize a sign-off on the offers? And
Personally, I don't see the value in a sign-off. And the only reason I don't see a value in the sign-off is that one way or another, it's reactive. Somebody's got to file a complaint. But I could be entirely wrong on that.
But how do we hold, like, what's the point of doing all of this if there's no accountability? Like,
Well,
why
because I
are
think
we-
there is accountability if there's a license complaint, number one. Number two, I think that we couple this with the PR of the commission and the PR of all of our associations, the education through the broker responsibility course, and we just push the messaging as hard as we possibly can into the public.
I think there needs to be, my personal opinion is there needs to be some sort of activity that brings it to light. And that activity may be just a sign off on a contract. That's just my personal opinion. Now, educating people is great, but we're trying to educate people that should be educated. And this brings it to light. Sometimes just flipping a light switch and saying, okay, this is done and this activity's been completed. Everyone knows it's been done. You can't, there's no fibbing on a contract if you have to sign off on it or an offer.
If I'm not mistaken, this is soccer. If I'm not mistaken, since we are not principals to the contract itself has no place for the licensees to sign on the contract.
No signature area for.
Page 9 though, we could add it
Page
there.
9 says do not sign. Page 9 says,
We talked about
yeah.
too, that it could be added potentially.
It would be a broker lawyer thing.
Right.
Now, that would be for the forms that we promulgate, and there are a lot of activities that, that reflect it's activities that don't have promulgated forms, right?
Mhm.
But is this something we could partner with Texas Realtors about with their forms as well?
None of it's a requirement. But that doesn't shut down the idea of documentation.
Yeah.
It just means, I'm gonna go back to what I keep saying, like, let's think really broadly of a documentation method that works for every transaction. Because what about when you're not using forms, right? Like, I mean, the TR forms or just any contract that's going on out there. I'm hearing lots of wild stories. So what does that mean?
Computer on
Do you
that.
still have that form?
Whose computer do you want?
The one that you
That's
sent. I do.
It's sitting in an email.
Could something like that work?
Something like that, so I think something like that could work. So, and I don't have it, and it would be very hard for me to find on the fly. In terms of, so Commissioner Leonard sent me something that looked a little bit like, the supplement A for agents, but it would be for that sign-off component. And it really depends on this question of what is staff doing with this documentation? Because we have to think in terms of staffing numbers, because we're not talking about a much higher number of license holders here when you're talking about agents.
And what that means is when you submit information or when you send anything to the commission, what's it for? It's because you're applying for a license, you're renewing, or you're in trouble, right? Like there's no other mechanism to send things to track and we receive it and then do something with it. So if you don't do it in those time period, connected to that activity, then why are you doing it and what do we do with it, right? And we've got 212,000 license holders. That would be wrong, over 200,000.
And I think.
So that's me doing a quick copy and paste.
Read it.
Or whatever that is.
She's about to share it. And Denise is here to talk a little bit about what documentation could, like the practical implications of documentation and requirements and licensing databases and all of our numbers, the good stuff. Okay.
So that's a copy and paste of what I was talking about. I just did, so it could be crap, but.
First 5 times, yeah.
I don't know if 5 is the right number.
I mean,
It's just
The number that's.
placeholder. We all seem to be revolving around.
Yeah, worked.
Do you want Denise to talk about
I like 6.
logistics?
Sorry. Can we do that first?
You're in charge.
Okay, I don't know which order they went up, do we? No, okay. Mr. Baker.
Okay, I need a little bit of a clarification. One of the things that we're talking about on the matrix that we were looking at earlier was a new agent. An agent, maybe in their first 2 years or maybe in their first 10 years, who's doing something new. A residential agent been in business 5 years and now decides to want to do a commercial. Well, we have in the 535.2, we address that, dealing with that, when they're doing that for the first time. So am I understanding that we've got 2 different scenarios? Because in your first 5 transactions or 2 years or whatever, for a new agent, they could also fall under that. Not only are they doing certain transactions, they're trying to do a new transaction. We've already covered that in the rules there. So we do have 2 separate types of things that we're dealing with here, aren't we? Am I missing?
I don't think so. I agree.
When we're dealing with that brand new agent and the first, whatever the time frame is, and the first whatever number of transactions they're doing, we're saying we need some process here where somebody is reviewing those, and we're going to hold the broker responsible for the competency of that agent in their first 5 transactions, 10 transactions, 2 years, whatever. Is that's the main thing of this matrix right here, isn't it?
Except that they're separate.
Well, they're separate, but I tend to agree with you, Mr. Baker, that 535.2 covers all, whether it's somebody who is brand new or it's somebody who, like you said, has been licensed for 5 or 6 years and wants to change it or add to a specialty. I think it governs both equally.
Okay. Well, I think the big thing here is deciding whether it's going to be a time frame and dealing with this whole delegated supervisor concept. We're still holding the broker responsible, but we're inserting this delegated supervisor thing in here, and we're trying to decide on number of transactions as opposed to timeline. Is that kind of where we're going with this?
I believe so, yes, sir.
Okay. And I heard briefly a little bit of a comment, and hopefully I misunderstood it, about doing something to the contract that made the agents party to the contract. Did I misunderstand what was going on there?
Yes, I said that we currently are not parties to the contract. And if we have the brokers or the agents or the delegated supervisors have a line on the contract in which they sign, then it makes us parties to the contract, which we're not supposed to be. The page that has that information on it says for information only, do not sign.
Okay, and so I would think that the ramifications of that slippery slope are so huge that I think anything we would do that might cause us to be part of the contract would be a huge mistake. I think we don't even need to go down that road.
Agreed.
Okay, thank you.
Well, so I think we're, again, to go back, I think we're thinking with our page 9 and page 10 hats on, what if it's a 75-page commercial contract written by attorneys?
Right.
Yeah.
So, Commissioner Miller.
Go ahead. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Commissioner Miller. I can't tell if she's trying to talk about it. She's pretty good. Chief.
Whenever.
Commissioner Miller, we can't hear you. You may have the same issue that Chair Kestner had, which he had to hang up his cell. Oh,
There she is.
I know that.
Oh, good.
There we go.
Okay, I just want to address the current market that we are in is moving so fast. And yes, I know the mentors are supposed to be looking at everything that's being done, as well as the supervisors. But if you make a requirement that these people sign off on an offer before it is presented to a consumer, our agents are going to lose transactions, and nobody's going to be happy about that. And then we'll have complaints from agents, not just complaints from consumers, which really, statistically, we get very few complaints, and to me, that is one of the issues. Most all of the activities that we do as agents or brokers are involving forms that have to be signed. So I think that's a moot point, but I think the reason or the way for a broker to have to govern something like this, and then the commission to have to govern it, you're opening a can of worms that I don't see how it can be done. So I think you need to figure that out before you make new rules. And I'm not saying the rules don't need to be made or changed. I just say, tell us how to govern it first, please.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Roth.
I would sort of echoing what Jan's saying. I'm the way I'm looking at, look, I'm certainly in our position here, and our hat that we're wearing here is to protect the consumers. I'm not personally really clear as to how big of an issue this is with consumers, and if this really is a major issue. And if it is, then certainly we have to address it in a different way. But my overriding thought here is that this is not a regulatory issue. This is a best practices issue with in an organizational and business practice issue. And I think that the fact that the way that we're set up in a broker salesperson relationship, that is the sort of the classic apprentice or supervisory relationship that I think is intended. It's up to, I think, the broker to be responsible for running his business in the best way. If he and the ramifications on that are on the broker anyway. If his agents screw up, if they're not educated, if they're not doing the right thing, he's not going to have business, or he's going to get sued, or he's going to lose customers, or he's going to have problems. And that's I don't think a regular But U.S. regulators have created a good standard, a baseline and foundation for everybody to try to be educated, try to have some experience, and give them the tools to create a business that's going to be beneficial to them and benefit the consumers. But I would really caution this group, and I say this group, that the commission, to really start regulating how we train people within the organizations. I think the solution might be to really, and I think we've talked about this in previous meetings, is to really create a joint task force with the stakeholders, which are have an educational task force with represented by brokerage companies, represented by the trade organizations and the education organizations, and maybe some consumers, to say, how can we improve best practices in the industry before we start imposing additional rules on everybody that may or may not be enforceable, may be difficult to do, which creates a big bureaucracy, and ultimately may trip everybody up to reduce activity, because everybody's going to be afraid to do stuff. So anyway, I would caution everybody to look at this at a little bit of a higher level.
Thank you, sir.
And I wrote that down, Bill. Thank you.
Mr. Baker, I don't know if your hand is up again or if it's still up from before.
I suspect it's because I failed to lower my hand, and for that I apologize. I'll lower it now. Thank you.
There, Ms. Perez.
Just wanted to take it a little bit just broader, just going on the two, for just putting my 2 cents out there. Just looking at both, I really don't like the idea of the 2-year part, and I think everybody kind of feels that way. It just doesn't protect the consumer, because an agent can have one transaction a year and they're still not competent. So I don't think that solves what we're trying to accomplish here. And it's, of course, legislation and all that. So if everybody kind of feels that way, should we just focus on
Number of transactions.
And kind of X out the other one?
Is everybody comfortable with that?
Yes.
Yes. So there we go.
Yes, thumbs up.
Have a direction.
I really
Right,
like your
that's great.
thoughts, Chance, about numbers of transactions per activity or activity type. I think that's really wise, and it may not just fall within that 2-year period or during that SAE or initial license period. It goes beyond that.
Yeah, because like Bob
any
said,
age of licensure.
Let's say 5-10 years down the road, you want to start doing farm grant. The same rule has to apply, right? Even if you've been licensed for a long time. So I agree 100% on that. What I would like to do, if we can, is let's look at the 4 bullet points we have under considerations. I think we've already kind of scratched through independent contractor status somewhat as an issue there. Because, I mean, there's already a ton of brokerages that have mentor programs where you're overseeing for 5 transactions or however many that number is, right? So I think there's that. Mike, do you want to talk a little bit about what, if any of these complaints, I mean, if we're having to put this in front of a governmental agency that's going to look at regulatory compliance, as something of a data skeptic.
She would be regulatory compliance more than me.
Okay.
You're gonna give me my data.
As something of a data skeptic, I might argue that the person who is 7 or 8 years in would have a larger pool of data to complain on than the person who is 1 or 2 years in. Because they're not probably doing as many transactions. If I'm somebody who's 7 or 8 years in, I'm probably doing more transactions than somebody who's 1 or 2 years in. So the
I think a lot of people that
getting
get
complained
in the
on is
industry,
higher.
I think, what's a turnaround on an industry person? I mean, it's 80% out within 2 years, right? So if they may not get any business, so that's why we don't get any complaints. And so the ones that get more experienced, I mean, they may get more confident or get tripped up on something.
Take things for granted.
I mean, they get into new situations that they haven't been in the past too, so.
But if you don't have a rule on the books that they're breaking, there's nothing to turn them in for, because there's nothing that can be done to them.
Competency.
Yeah, competency, for sure.
And I think that's the conversation on, both in the associations and at the commission is competency, geographical, activity types of competency, and I think that's what we're talking about addressing.
I mean, this even, if we want to break down, this even goes to Lee's comments on property management.
Yes.
Yep,
Is
competency.
The competency factor. I think.
Question, so how would it work if an agent transfers? So is it, like if they transfer brokerages, is it the first, do they prove that they've done X amount of transactions from their previous broker? Do they start over with each broker?
That kind of goes to the brokers.
I think that's up to the broker
Broker.
to find that out.
I can't.
I really do.
The broker.
Yeah, I think that
The new broker, like, after having transactions, maybe ask for proof?
on the residential side, we have the luxury of having an MLS,
Yeah.
right? But even then, that doesn't cover everybody, because if I'm hiring somebody who was a team member over here,
Yeah.
and all transactions had to go through the team leader, I may not have any documentation that that agent's done anything. When that person's done hundreds of transactions, potentially, and we just don't know. And so, I mean, there's gotta be an element of the broker doing some due diligence and taking responsibility for themselves here.
Yeah. But that's the point of, trying to, we're trying to identify the problem and a path to solutions.
Right.
We can't start here.
Right.
Certainly, those are the considerations we need to take place, but we can't eliminate the idea that licensees need to be competent in their
For
areas
sure.
of practice. Right?
Absolutely.
Because we don't know how to measure it.
Correct.
We don't eliminate this ideal because we don't know how to measure it or how to
Well,
manage
we pursue competency just differently, right? I mean, there's a whole,
Well, when you get a license, you're expected to know some of the stuff, or go to your broker who has that experience. So if you get in trouble, it doesn't matter in my book, because the broker's there to guide you along the way. And it's still a violation, negligent or competency, or any of the other laundry list of violations that we have. There's no, we do take in consideration maybe in regards to the type of, or how badly we punish someone, how long they've been licensed, or other mitigating factors, because the statute requires that. But when you walk out the door, when you pass your license, there's an expectation of a minimum level of competency. Or if you don't have that, you got your broker to back you up.
and so this would be in addition to that, right? So we have methods on competency and negligence. This isn't it. This is another thing that's considering that supervision component from the broker. Does that make sense, Brian?
On the notes outside of this group's meetings, I served as the liaison from this group to ESAC, and we had a conversation kind of surrounding this. And the conversation was, how do we put into pre-licensure, hey, this is what a good broker looks like, right? And this is what you should expect of your broker when you get out of here from a competency standpoint. And so there are conversations there happening surrounding that, so that they hear it. They don't hear it when it's too late, or they don't find out from their friend that they went to school with at whatever real estate school that, oh, you should to call me back, or whatever that looks like. So there are conversations about that in pre-licensure.
All strategies
No,
targeted.
they get out of the class and they say, ooh, hey, my friend went over here because this broker only charges them X amount of dollars per transaction and they keep the whole commission. So that's what I want to do. That's what a lot of them end up doing.
You're in trouble.
Yep.
They don't know any better.
They don't know any better. That's right.
So that was kind of the idea was, can we let them know better before it's too late?
Right.
Yeah.
Right? Is there something we can put in pre-licensure that says, here are some best practices of a good broker to go work for?
Yeah, I wish somebody would have told me that when I started.
When I started, I was the Houston office of the San Antonio brokerage. And by Houston office, I mean me in my bedroom. Right? My broker was a good guy, he was knowledgeable and competent, would answer the phone, but there was no training, there was no anything.
I was lucky. My broker was a veteran, and every contract that I did before I even did contracts, he would go into MLS every morning for the first 3 weeks of my life as an agent and give me an address and tell me to sell something to a buyer with using specific contract, either FHA, VA, conventional seller financing. So by the time I actually wrote a contract, I had written about 25 contracts, and I am so grateful for that training. And I do the same thing to my agents, for my agents.
So, no, I mean, so I think we've moved, it sounds like we like transactional numbers, right? So we're at a time period, and we're looking at one, what is that number? And two, the documentation side of that. And so I think Chelsea mentioned something that's really important, which is, when does TREC touch a license or interact with its license holders? You have, she mentioned 3 instances. Denise handles 2 of those 3, and Mike handles the scary one, the last of the 3, which is enforcement. So it sounds like everybody liked the idea of some, maybe not everybody, but there seemed to be a general liking for some sort of documentation, right? And we kind of went into okay, is it a place on the contract? Is it a sign off? Is it an attestation? What is it, right? And we can talk pros and cons on all of those options. I will say ultimately, I think what will happen here, we'll open up that conversation, and we've got a form here to look at that Commissioner Lerner drafted. But ultimately, and Denise, I think, has a really great resource in terms of like, what is the reality in terms of we're a licensing agency, what are the numbers, what does that review process look like? We're getting a new database, we're trying to make it less actual people having to manually input things, which will make you all happier because your rules will process faster, et cetera. So she's got that resource component, but ultimately, whatever comes out of today in this forum discussion, which I think is incredibly valuable, is that staff will have to digest it slowly, and really look at what does all of that mean, but your input on, I think you guys have the industry realities that we don't necessarily have. And we have the agency realities that you all don't have. So it's like a perfect mix. If you want, Denise can walk you through the numbers of renewals. We could start at it seems like maybe the enforcement component. You could start it with as a licensing form, or is it something that they keep, and if they get in trouble, right? Something like there's a rule that requires you to keep this log of those transactions, and when Mike comes knocking at your door, you're like, here's that thing that says I did all that stuff. And that doesn't necessarily absolve you of other things either, right? But it's something. So I will just throw that out there in terms of how we envisioned that form documentation concept and the sort of real world application. And then we've got this up on the screen, which no one except for a few of us in this room have seen before, in terms of, it looks a little bit like supplement A, right? So I'll stop talking at some point.
Denise, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, sure. So Chelsea kind of, gave that overview, but we really only kind of digest documentation that's submitted as it relates to an initial license application or a renewal application. So one of the outliers that we have found a solution to deal with is when an agent knows that they want to upgrade to a broker license, and so they take real estate brokerage. Or they start taking additional qualifying elective courses, and then they just send them in. So they haven't applied to be a broker yet, but they're sending in this qualifying course certificate where Jen's team has already approved the content and approved the provider and everything. So we are actually currently in the process of testing, having a handful of education providers transmit qualifying course completion records directly to us electronically. So someone on my team doesn't have to go, oh, okay, yeah, this is this approved school, this approved course, they took it in the right time frame, let me plug this into the database. Because it's not tied to an application or, either initial or renewal. So we're moving in that direction because last fiscal year we had 12,406 first-time sales agent renewals that we processed. So, I don't have hard data on how many completed all before they apply for the license, but it's not the majority of them. So that's a lot of certificates that my team is reviewing and processing to click the button and have the approval on.
98 hours worth for each one of those 12,000.
Right.
Wow.
Well, the legal update 1 and 2, those come through electronically from the provider. So it's the qualifying hours. So hence the need for this project that, Jen's team and my team have been working on together. And also, in anticipation of a new system, that way it's, hey, we already do this. So this is something that's already an automated kind of process. So just to kind of give you those numbers, so out of the 12,406 sales agents renewing for the first time last fiscal year, 88% of those were active. And so as you guys are well aware, that qualifying education component is a requirement whether you're active or inactive. And then like Vanessa touched on, you can complete that all before you ever even apply for a license, or you complete it sometime over the course of the 2 years, or like most license holders, in the 90 days, right, in the last 90 days before that first expiration date.
Okay, give them credit for 40 days. The last 8 days.
So, there's, those are just the considerations that, that number of applications that someone has to touch. So it seemed like the consensus was not to tie it to a renewal. So, that's the data to really support the consensus, the logical decision there. But yeah, that's, and like I said, that's just fiscal year 21. We've been seeing the license holder counts go up. Chelsea also touched on the total number of license holders. We have, as of February, 47,595 licensed brokers, 170,989 licensed agents. So just total sales agents and brokers, and I expect that number's higher when I run the March numbers. The total sales and brokers is 218,000.
6,000.
You were so close.
So
218,584. Wow. And that's published on our website, that's the February data.
So from the standpoint of documenting transactions, whether they're a new licensee who is going to do 5 new brokerage activities, whatever that looks like, or it's somebody who's been licensed for a decade and all of a sudden wants to get into farm and ranch. What goes through your head when you think, other than a giant headache, what goes through your head?
I need more people. I need more people if there's going to be a review of that. The question was the question that Abby put on that beautiful flow chart is, what is the expectation? Is it just for us to be the file cabinet that just stores it? Or do you want there to be a review and analysis of it? What is the expectation?
And then what?
Right.
What do you do with it?
File cabinet.
Right.
Unless it's complaint.
Yeah.
And then the responsibility and onus goes back on the broker and sales agent to provide the documentation that,
Exactly.
Which is similar to the broker application process right now.
Correct.
There's attestations, this has been done, this is the experience that I've accrued. I was supervised by this person or sponsored while I gained this experience. And the requirement is, should we ask for it? someone on Mike's team asked for it, you need to produce it. That's the current process for the broker upgrade.
Well, I gotta upgrade now.
That's what we call it internally, it's an upgrade
application.
Which now makes me want to take that secondary piece out of it and just add 5 to the 535.2i.
Yeah. What about
Just say
3?
Or 3, I mean, whatever the number is, again, placeholder number.
Can we come up with a number and move on from that instead of using an arbitrary number?
Okay,
Yeah.
what do you think?
Just so we have another check mark.
Don can
How
make a
many-
motion.
How many fingers am I holding on my back?
Well, I'm just thinking like realistically, right? If it's,
If you're talking about, let's just take it from the standpoint of a brand new licensee. If you're talking about leases, buying and selling, and we're talking residential, that's 15 transactions of oversight. That's a lot.
yeah, so that's what I think 2, 1 is not enough,
One's certainly
obviously.
not enough.
2, kind of, so I'm like, if you get 3, I mean, that's, I don't know, that's why I come up with
We use 4 at my office, and it's very effective.
And we use 5.
And we use 5.
I use 2, but.
But also, we count it as a closed transaction, which in this market might mean they wrote 20 offers.
That's right.
So I would say they're
Minus
technically
2
proficient in
every-
writing a contract at that point.
Yeah.
Yeah, at least.
So,
So what does everyone propose? 4, 5, 3?
4, I'm okay with 4.
Well, let's ask your agents.
Yeah. What do you guys think?
What do you think it should be?
If 5 is the highest, I'm gonna say 5.
Yeah.
That's my.
I mean, 75.
It is.
I think you get unrealistic in that standpoint.
Because
I like
in
5,
my opinion, the agent,
but it is a lot to ask.
First, second, third, you're like, okay, I don't even know what I'm doing.
Yeah.
But it's 5 transactions, 5 per activity. So like it would be 5 leases, 5 listings,
Okay,
5
then I'm
rep
with the 3,
agreements
because that's,
Yeah, it's a
that
lot.
should be enough.
per
Right,
different.
yeah.
You know what we could also do? There's nothing that says we have to come up with a number.
No.
We could just make the suggestion to the commission that a number be added to subsection 5.
3 to 5.
Yeah.
No, we need to throw something out.
I
Yeah.
think
Just kidding.
I think we need to come up with a number.
I've seen
I got it.
advisory committees do that, and the commission typically goes more specific.
Swipe left.
Yeah, okay.
I'm gonna stick with what we did 4. I'll throw it out there, 4.
Okay, so I have a question on this.
Go for it, sir.
Whatever the number is, all of us deal with different numbers, but I heard the conversation about tying it to executed contracts as opposed to just offers, real estate activities. Is that going to really be kind of a broker discretion? We put a number in here, say 4 or 5 or whatever.
I was just using it as an example of what we do in my brokerage.
Sure.
It wasn't a proposal.
Well, but my thought is, will we be able to have a number and then leave it to the broker's discretion whether or not this is a number dealing with whatever kind of activity it might be? Some of the new agents that I've got, their first several transactions are all leases because they, that's as a brand new agent, that's what they can get into the quick and the easiest.
Absolutely.
And so I think a broker has to have some discretion there. And when they look at 5 real estate activities, they can say, okay, I want to see completed transactions, not just offers. As someone mentioned, we could have 15, 20 offers, but
Correct.
completed transactions. Is that going to be a broker discretion type of thing?
I believe that it would be, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Roth?
I would, I think that a meeting ago, or maybe a couple meetings ago, we reviewed that paragraph where it said that on the first transaction that it be supervised. And I think we had a discussion there about putting in other numbers there. And I thought that the rationale at that point was to create a minimum of 1 at least, and that sort of opens up and it gives a broad expectation that if it's a new first transaction, whether it's a new thing, it's an old thing, it sets a standard for the broker to start supervising people. I am really strongly suggesting that putting in numbers and in numbers of transactions and trying to figure out how we're going to enforce this and how we're going to document. I think this is a huge, big problem, and I don't know that it's really a relevant solution to a problem that may or may not really exist. And again, I want to protect the consumer. I want to make sure that we have the highest quality, folks out there doing the profession. But I really would strongly recommend that that we don't start setting limits on the number of transactions. We're all bakers. It's the question: what are we baking? Are we baking cookies or bread or dinner? For us, figuring out all the different products that we're baking, I think the regulatory aspect should be that we should be certainly competent in a certain base amount foundation for our general profession, and then it's up to our supervisors and our business partners and our practice partners and our clients to make sure that we're doing the right thing. It's not up to the state or regulatory body to do that. I don't think. Again, I'm opposed to setting any kind of a number, and again, I'm not saying it in an adversarial way, but I would really suggest that the group really consider the bigger ramifications of imposing this on 200,000 people. It's a big deal.
Comments from many agents that we took, not just from this group. Have you read any of the comments? I think there were probably about 500 comments of people asking for better regulation.
Yeah, who is that said that?
Commissioner Lerner.
Linda, yes, I didn't write all 500 comments, but I've been paying attention to the correspondence, and I've been reviewing correspondence that comes in, and I may not read every single one. Maybe you did, but I didn't. But I do have a sense of the issue, and I also have a sense that it's a narrow issue, and so again, it's just from a practical standpoint, and I think that I think that I'm hopefully informed in my comment.
Thank you, Chair. I think the question is one transact, and I think it ultimately becomes is that first time, is that one time make a person competent. And I don't disagree with you that we can get really down into the weeds with this real quick, but I personally don't feel like the first time that I wrote a contract, I was good at it.
No.
I think that's what licensure is all about, is the entity issuing the license is assuring that the licensee is competent to perform that activity for which they're licensed. And I think the state of the world has changed. Business models have changed, and it's created an environment where there is less supervision. And those are the comments that we're reading and hearing, is that I'm dealing with agents who are unsupervised. So I think it's appropriate that the licensing agency respond in a way that does protect the consumer, and that means a higher degree of responsibility for those responsible brokers and their designated or delegated supervisors to provide that supervision. And it helps to maintain that level of delivery to the consumer, which may have been eroded in the past several years.
I do tend to agree with Bill that the number should be lower than higher, though, on those things. And then if a broker chooses to go above that, that's their value proposition to that agent. That's their value proposition to the market, frankly. When we're talking about a number, I would lean towards something more along the lines of 3 than a 5.
Per activity.
Per activity.
And if
for the first 3 times they do that activity.
I think that's really way ahead of where we're at today.
I think it's simple and it's easy, and it's from an enforcement standpoint, it gives Mike some latitude. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, there is a possibility. I'm not saying that this is a for sure thing. It would have to be looked into, but as the new website is built, when you log into your name or whatever and you're in there, there could be some sort of documentation that you can account for this kind of stuff, and it's just there, it just sits there, but you keep track of it.
I don't,
I'm not sure I
That's
understand.
I don't know what that
attached,
looks
that it like attached to your license
Yeah.
number.
Like in the
No
back end.
idea if
Okay.
this is feasible.
Yes.
We're in the process of creating an entirely new system for licensing and to hold our information and for processing. We've already written the scope of that. We're in the process of getting bids. Nothing like this is included in it. But I think what you're saying is, could there be a mechanism on our website, so maybe connected to like the license holder search, that would house this information? I don't know.
is
It's
that
like a fillable
is that
form
a-
or
do
something,
we-
but that can just
do we deal with that when
document
it's there?
your transactions or whatever, so it's just there. If you move brokers, it's just there.
It wouldn't be something we could count on for in making a recommendation for today.
Right.
You have to come up with a
We'd have to come
mechanism for
back.
documentation if
You could have
Yeah.
something temporary to then it would evolve into.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, I think Chelsea just mentioned it to me. I'm looking at Denise going,
Yeah.
There's some
That's
side
real
eye
hard.
you can get it over
Yeah.
there.
But that's not, that, like I said, we're gonna take it all back, digest it, look at practical applications, so we'll put the idea out there.
Okay,
Like that, I think that's, I mean, if it's even possible, that would be years away. It could not be connected to what you count on.
right. Let's go back to the original discussion of a number.
I'll second the 3.
All right, everybody's on board with 3, yes? Going once, going twice, sold, great.
Yes.
I
Now,
think based on, Bill, you may want to take a vote. Yeah.
we're
Because
gonna,
you may
when we
have-
actually do the actual,
Oh, was that not the vote?
no, this is just
Okay.
getting to a number.
Okay, got it.
This is just getting to a number to replace our placeholder is 5, right? Commissioner Miller.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, it works sometimes. I still feel, and I read all the correspondence I think that Leslie's talking about in the past, and unless we are going to file a complaint against the bad actors, I do not see that enforcement can do anything to help. Licensing is not going to be able to follow the licenses adequately without hiring more employees. And how many of you in this room are willing to file complaints every time you get a badly written contract?
You're not wrong. I mean, I think no matter what we do here, it becomes reactive, right?
Just remember, failure to supervise your agent that not within the real estate transaction, some of that is not something we can open. That's like, your boss is, like, for me, Chelsea was a bad boss. There's nowhere to fall like that, so, you know.
But
Hang on. Go ahead, Commissioner.
Mike, if I get a badly written contract that hurts the parties to the contract, and I even talk my seller into filing a complaint, we don't do that even in our industry, do we? Often enough.
We do not.
We don't, because we're afraid of getting a bad name and people won't sell our listings then, or whatever we're afraid of. But we don't do that, and until we start doing that, complaining, this situation is not going to improve. You can slap brokers on the hand all you want to, and I never knew that brokers weren't responsible, because I will tell you, we've been sued or complained about in everything over the last 50 years that I can count on. So you're trying to move the bar, but you're not. You're doing it with Band-Aids, guys. It seems like to me. Thank you for what you're doing, though.
Barbara, what do you suggest? I mean, Jan, what do you suggest then? How do you raise the bar?
You insist that brokers go to broker responsibility and probably do it in a classroom setting instead of online. And you be very careful how you write the broker responsibility book. and get it okayed by several different brokers bigger than the writing group. Because I will tell you that I made some corrections to it the last time it was written, because I said, you can't do that, but it wasn't caught anywhere. But I knew, because I've been in this business too long. Too long is maybe operative, but you've got to work at the broker source. That's what the law tells us we've got to do. So until you make the brokers responsible, it's not going to work. And again, we've tried the licensing numbers and people are complaining about that, but you got to have something that's enforceable.
And on your note, I mean, until we make a system where we can anonymously complain, no one's going to complain, like you said.
Right. And they can't complain though anonymously, because you got to figure out which transaction it's on, and then everybody's no longer anonymous.
Right, exactly.
And none of us want.
Thoughts?
Great.
I feel like I threw a wet blanket over y'all, and I didn't.
No, it's good feedback.
She's got a point, yes.
Sure she does.
I think there's a pretty common understanding or misunderstanding that a licensee cannot file a complaint against another licensee. It's only consumer licensee.
That's
No.
What? Isn't that what Mike just said?
There's anyone involved.
Broker.
I'm just saying that that's a pretty common understanding
Misconception.
or misconception that I, as a licensee, cannot file a complaint against another licensee. Correct.
We have work to do then, because I think you would be one of the,
It's a pretty good.
I
broad
thought
misconception.
that was a fact. I'm one of those people. I thought it was just for consumers.
No.
And that if I wanted
it's
to
for
file a
consumer
complaint.
protection, right? Which would mean that, you're essentially part of our police force.
Mr. Baker.
That's a message that we can.
Yeah.
Yes, to the direction of what Commissioner Miller was talking about and the several conversations about the complaint challenge. And I think we'll always have that to some degree, because even though we've improved dramatically from the good old days way back when it was useless to file a complaint. And it was a joke to file a complaint with TREC. I mean, I remember that 30 years ago. Just like it was a joke to say, when can I call TREC? Well, first of all, it better be in the first 3 minutes or you'll never get an answer. Well, we fixed that. But I think it really comes back to the broker level, and that my rule in my offices, my agents are not allowed to file a complaint until they've given me the opportunity to talk to the broker. Until I've been able to interact with a broker to find out what's going on. Now, if the reaction I get from the broker is, not my problem, well, then we're going down the complaint road. We're going to address that and have no reluctance to do that. I think we've got to create an environment so that the good brokers see what needs to be done, the responsibility we're expecting of them, and create an environment that they either get on board with it, or frankly, they're embarrassed to be in our industry without us creating any obstacles that the legislature and other people aren't going to be happy with. And I realize there's always going to be a group, and I mentioned it in my email, of brokers who just are brokers. They're the whole company, and they're incompetent, and there's nowhere to go except a complaint and dealing with those people. One of my good buddies out in West Texas, which is where I started, one of his favorite phrases when I complained, he said, well, that's just, he said, Bob, you got to understand, you can't fix stupid. And I said, okay, I understand where you're going, but we can sure try. We can sure try to create an environment so that people will see, here's who we are as realtors, because those of us who do work really hard at the job, really hard at it, and I think it's everybody in this room, and still end up with complaints. I mean, I'm fighting a TREC complaint right now in one of my offices. And I who knows what's going to happen, and I accept all kinds of responsibility. But even those of us who work really hard at it have to deal with that responsibility. Well, somehow we've got to make those people out there who don't work really hard at it understand if you're going to be a real estate agent, if you're going to be a real estate broker in our business, here's what we expect you to do. And if you don't do it, there are going to be consequences, and we need to step up to those consequences. Otherwise, we're going to continue to have people who see real estate as just a way to make deals. It's just a way to make money in whatever way they can. And we're going to all suffer from the kickback that the consumers have with those people. And we deal with it I deal with it every day when my agents who are fighting challenges on the other side. And, you know, I just sit there and go, and when the problem is the agent on the other side is the broker or the company, I have little latitude. I got to go to the complaint process to do anything. And, you know, we're fortunately in a situation now where that's more productive than it used to be. But somehow we've got to step up the broker responsibility. But part of the broker responsibility is what we're doing right now, and it's the education side. You know, we started it, 12 years ago, recognizing if we're going to hold the brokers responsible, we need to teach them what that means. We need to educate them. That started the course, the broker responsibility course, and that has evolved. I'm really anxious to hear what we've got on the update in a few minutes and dealing with that. But if we can educate the brokers out there saying, here's what it means when we say you're responsible, and you either need to step up and be responsible or get out of the room and move on, because it's hurting all of us. I've been doing this too long to keep suffering this kind of stuff. Sorry, I didn't mean to get on the soapbox there, but it's just gotten to be, I mean, I'm about to have to go into therapy to deal with all this. I can't afford more therapy.
You would be, does us raising the number from the first time to the first 3 times and then coupling that with education and PR, does it move that bar at all?
I think it does. I think having a minimum number, in spite of what Bill thinks, I think in a minimum number, broker discretion, and I think most brokers are going to say, based on a particular agent, says, you know what, 3 is the minimum required by TREC, but we do 5, or we do 6, or we do the whatever. And that's part of the value proposition. I heard that earlier. I think new agents, when they see a broker is going to have 5, 6, whatever, say, wow, that's great. I mean, that creates a resource for me as a new broker, because right now I'm clueless. So when they're going to be looking over my first 5 or 6, that's a plus. That's part of the value proposition. And I think working through that process can really make a difference as we have new people coming in. I think, hey, let's have a minimum number, whatever it is, 3 or whatever, and make sure the education is there for the broker to understand, hey, it's your discretion.
Okay.
If we're going to hold the broker responsible, we got to give them a lot of discretion on how they do that.
Yes, agreed. All right, Commissioner Miller, is your hand up still, or did you want to add in? There we go. All right.
So we can take the documentation feedback back and look at it, and depending on how it's workshopped, bring something forward at the next meeting, or, you know, I would just assume the next meeting, to talk about like, hey, we looked at it and it seems like something like similar to what, you know, Commissioner Lerner's given us, but we paired it to this and we tied it to whatever. We as staff can look at that and take your feedback. It seems like we understand, like, you want something. What does that something look like? Where does it start? Where does it end? You know, et cetera. We've heard attestations.
But also, how does it differ between a new licensee and somebody who's going into a new specialty or doing a new transaction?
That's right. And I think that's a great point. So we can do that and bring that back. That's not necessary for the recommendation today. We just kind of wanted to talk with you all about that and what that looks like, because also I knew you had input, right? You guys have thoughts on this stuff. So we don't have to solve the form today.
Correct. So it would appear, based on conversation, that there is something of a general consensus that the recommendation of this group to the commission would be the amendment of 535.2 subsection I5 to replace for the first time with for the first 3 times. Am I correct in that assumption? Incorrect in that assumption?
Yes, you're correct.
Hearing a general consensus, the chair would entertain a motion as to that.
So
I'll second.
A motion and a second.
we had a motion by Pam and a second by Holly.
Yes.
Okay, I'm doing that for Amber.
Very good. Any further discussion on this? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Okay, good job. That was good. And we can always come back to it. We can always come back to it. All right. Leslie, you want to take the lead on number 6, or you want me to take the lead on number 6?
Oh, wait, sorry, real quick.
Yes, ma'am.
Was that also gonna include the whole, classroom broker, like to push that, what you talked about, like education?
Yes, we will make that as part of the recommendation.
Okay.
The Trex PR takes over,
Yes.
and then we also work with the local and state associations, trade groups, things like that, to push that messaging out. And because they're all eagerly awaiting it, because we talked about it in our meeting yesterday, the broker responsibility course writing group will also, was that yesterday? Monday, whatever day of the week it is, who knows? Monday, they're eagerly awaiting the results of this discussion as well. So, there we go. On that note, let's talk about the broker responsibility course writing group, shall we?
Yes.
You want to lead off? You want me to lead
Yeah,
off?
I can start.
Go.
So this is really intended to be an update on what's been going on because the two seem pretty tied, right? Broker responsibility course and broker responsibility. I heard some ideas. I think Commissioner Miller mentioned this idea of the course being required for more folks in person, things like that. So I think that's that might be a discussion for the next agenda, something along those lines. It'd be a statutory change to make it required for those not already included. But to look at the course, so we've got a course writing group. For anyone who hasn't served on these, there's a group that gets together, subject matter experts. So we've always got folks from staff on there. We've got some people from the real world. I'm gesturing at Chance because he's on the group right now. And so take a look at what the old course book had. We're going a little bit of a different direction this time that I'm really hopeful will be impactful in terms of what is broker responsibility and what should brokers know that they have to do, and what should agents see in their brokers, right? And that's the beginning of the messaging, because I know that agents aren't required to take this course. Do we have agents that take this course? 100% for a variety of reasons, depending on the role they are in and at their brokerage. Some people just want to take it, etc. Right? So this is a place to get that messaging out that we're talking about, right? What is a broker? What is an agent? What's that responsibility? What does the broker need to be making sure is happening, right? So we walk through the broker responsibility rule. We're adding in best practices, right? Here's what Trek rule says. Here are some best practices.
I think that's probably to me, that's the most exciting change of this, is it's not just, here's what the minimum required that you can get by with is, but here's what this looks like when it's actually done right.
And I think that's the real value of having subject matter experts that can kind of weigh in on that component. We're gonna cover things, contract competency is a big one. We're looking at teams, team management, understanding.
What the role of broker versus team leader versus team member are, and how that all partners and interacts together.
Yep, and we're teaching, I will say this, we're teaching less things. Like, we're not teaching the advertising rules necessarily. We're as a broker, what are you looking out for with your agents? So we're really trying to make it, this is what I said, let's put the responsibility back in broker responsibility, right? But really, let's focus on those responsibilities and less teaching brokers the substance that they should have. And if they are reading the book and they don't have it, it should cue them in that they should get it. But the course itself is really gonna focus on that responsibility.
And a lot more activity driven, right? A lot more discussion driven, because the idea here is, okay, let's talk about if you were creating from scratch a brokerage, what would your policies and procedures be on advertising? Would they just match the TREC guidelines? Would you take the Texas Realtors model policy? Would you create this or that or whatever that looks like in your brokerage? And the idea being that whether you're an associated broker, whether you are the supervising broker, or whether you're a team leader, if you're not taking time to think about these things and actually put some thought behind it, you're probably missing the boat. So I'm excited about the direction it's headed, because it's not sit here for 6 hours and listen to me tell you the rules.
Yeah, yeah, and I think you're gonna see some more of that sort of preliminary outline development coming down the pike in 1 and 2 as well. And listening to the feedback we get from groups like this. So we'll keep you updated. It's gonna,
And for the record, this
ever.
discussion is an entire chapter. Discussion that we just had in this last bullet point is an entire chapter, and we're kind of doing, did everybody do highlights for children when you were a kid? Right?
Yeah.
Remember Goofus and Gallant?
Yeah.
We're kind of taking a spin on Goofus and Gallant. On mentorship, on, overseeing training and development, things like that.
And this is the author right here, so he'll be in the trenches.
Really Byron Underwood, but
yeah, but on the mentorship, we cued Chance in just knowing that he's been a part of these conversations. And I know that Bob, I think you had some comments that sort of fell in under this as well, so I don't, that's all that we have though in terms of the update on the course book.
But it's exciting. I like what we've seen so far, and I mean, we've got Avis, we've got Carrie, we've got staff, we've got Byron, who, oversees the curriculum for champions and oversaw training for Weichert and Hopewell Banker for years and years and years. There's just a wealth of experience. We've got obviously we have Charles Porter on there. We've got a ton of really experienced people that, it's how do we keep it at 6 hours? Honestly, on some of this.
We struck some chapters.
Yeah, seriously, we struck some stuff out of it because we're like, what do we really need to focus on right now? And it's, also kind of one of the cool things of that book being rewritten every 2 years is that what's appropriate for the marketplace we're in today will get covered. And then what do we know? Who knows what the market's look like in 2 years? Are we talking about not doing property management when you don't know things like that. And so the really cool part is that we're able to adapt it to the needs of right now. So, yeah.
The places where you feel like you have too much or you just want to say more, keep notes on that so that we can just push articles and small videos, and we turn that into communications for license holders.
Right.
Well, and there's been some talk, and again, this is really preliminary, right? But there has been some talk of really trying to utilize the appendices as a resource tool, as opposed to here's the role play, or here's the rule, or whatever it is. But hey, let us provide some of these white papers that TREC or TAR, or whoever has written in the past, or whatever that is, as really keep this book and hold on to it.
Yeah,
and refer back to it later.
And I think some more video component that's TREC initiated, so that we know the message is going out to every single person who takes the class, right? So we know without a doubt, I'm making this up, the TREC message on mentorship, that's not what's going on, but the TREC message on contract competency is out and everyone is getting it. And so I think that will be really important. But I just made up those video topics.
No, it's really coming together nicely. I'm pretty excited about it. Mr. Baker, you have your hand up, sir?
Yes, I do. And so I'm glad to have some people here who are actually involved in this so I can get some insight. I want to be sure. I mean, one of the in my experience is every time I teach this course, I find myself looking, saying, "Whoa, that's something as a broker I'm supposed to be doing, and I'm not yet." And it's a work in progress. And every time I teach it, I learn something. I say, "Wow, man, I wasn't paying attention to that." So hopefully, we continue to educate the brokers on what it means to be responsible, what we're expecting of that broker. And we encourage our agents to go to the course so they can find out what their broker should be doing, which, by the way, is always a challenge when my agents come back from one of those classes. They come to me and say, "Bob, we just learned this in class and I don't remember you doing this." And that's always an eye opener. So I want to make sure that that original concept of helping brokers be educated on what they're responsible for is still a main part of this course. Is that still there? We're just changing how we're addressing that or how we're.
That's correct, sir.
Okay, perfect. I look forward to seeing this next year and seeing what you've got. Thank you.
And I didn't realize until from the real estate center is on with us. I don't know if she wanted. I mean, with Trek. I'm sorry. Whatever. Ruby, I didn't know if you wanted to comment on anything or.
Oh, hi everyone. So I concur with what everyone is saying. I'm really excited about integrating a lot more interactivity and discussions in this version of broker responsibility, as well as I think we can get a lot of the messaging out using videos and just different ways to engage the brokers, because so many of them are used to sitting there for 6 hours and having the information thrown at them, basically. And I think by using some more interactivities, we can get the discussion going, and it'll be things they can remember and things that they can take back to their agents. So that's kind of my objective in wanting to put together a really great version of this broker responsibility.
Awesome.
And just for everybody's reference, Jennifer Gruby is our curriculum developer.
I don't know why I thought she was a real estate center. I'll have to watch. Need today, that's my problem. Comments, questions, concerns, thoughts? All right, our next meeting is scheduled for Wednesday, July 13th, 2022. Unless anything changes, we'll be back here at this building.
July 13th?
July 13th, 2022, 10 a.m. Anything that you want to add?
Thank you. I mean, no, thank you, truly, thank you for everything.
Future agenda items.
Oh, future agenda items. Anything we want to add to the future agenda items?
Do we want to put a conversation about broker responsibility course?
Yes, I think broker responsibility course, another update on that. Do we want to bring back documentation?
Yeah, we'll do that as part of it. I mean, mentorship will be on there.
Yeah, and then change property management stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I also have one I'd like to see us look at in the future. We talked about this in the previous broker responsibility group, and that's making a distinction between their requirements to obtain a broker's license or to be a sponsoring broker. I think it's a world of difference, and somehow we need to, without coming up with a new license or something, if you are going to get a broker's license and hire people and be responsible for them, that needs to be at a different level than just being one of the agents in my office and have a broker's license or be a sole proprietor.
So we're talking about
I'd like to see us have that discussion.
Or you're talking about the difference between an associated broker and a sponsoring broker.
Well, just someone with a broker's license. Could be a sole proprietor, he doesn't sponsor anybody. He's got his own little company. He's the broker, and he's got a broker's license or a broker associate, either one. But I want to make that distinction between someone, because that person who has his own little company, he's a sole proprietor and he's got a broker's license, could wake up one morning and say, "I think I'll hire 10 people and they do all the work." Well, there's nothing. We don't have anything that requires that person to know anything or be any better or have any experience or have anything. They just got their broker's license yesterday and now they're going to open up a company, and that's scary.
Gotcha.
I think at least we need to discuss that.
Yeah, we can add that.
Okay, sir, we got it.
Thank you.
Commissioner Miller.
I have just a thought that at this time of year, we get so many agents who have gotten their, talked to their CPAs while they're doing their licenses. And the CPAs do not know the Texas Real Estate License Act and advise their people to get their LLC so that they can get paid differently. Okay, that's fine and good, but they have to have a broker's license. And then we, as their broker, are in trouble when we say, you got to go to school, or you got to find somebody that will sponsor you that way, because I don't want the liability of all those LLC businesses they can go into. If it goes along with what Bob said about a sponsoring broker versus a broker of an LLC or a broker that doesn't, an associated broker. If there's some kind of designation that we can give them that they can do that, to me, it would be very beneficial to the industry.
Well, that doesn't even get us into the conversation about the renter brokers on those LLCs that are the broker of record for 98 different LLCs and have zero supervision on any of them.
Right, right, I agree.
Okay. Anything else you want to add? Meeting adjourned. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
I'd be dying to know what's the shovel in your hand.